Chapter 1. Uzumaki Naruto was many things: a demon vessel, a sage, and one of only 3 ninja in the history of the elemental nations to be given a SSS rank. But at the moment he was just tired and angry. He had put up a brave, happy face for years now, and he was finally reaching the end of his very long tolerance for taking other people's shit. Despite what people thought of him, he had never been an idiot. Well, maybe he had, but he had never been an unintelligent idiot. He had always known that there was little chance of him ever becoming Hokage. Konoha would always be weary of him, but he had hoped against hope that he would gain respect and recognition. He was now 17 years old and still a genin. That's not to say that he didn't have skill. While he had, admittedly, been one of the weakest of the Rookie 9 before his training trip with Jiraiya, Sakura and Ino don't count, he was now easily the strongest. Pervert he may be, but Jiraiya was a decent teacher when it came down to it. At first the Toad Sage had wanted to train him to use the fox's chakra, but Naruto had steadfastly refused. The Sannin had been skeptical at first. Like everyone else, he hadn't seen much potential in the boy. But once they started Kagebushin training, he had quickly revised his opinion. By the time he came back to Konoha 3 years later, Naruto had been on an even footing with his master, meaning they were tied as the 2 most powerful shinobi in the Leaf. And even then, Naruto's huge reserves and insane stamina allowed him to outlast the older man every time they fought. Of course, Tsunade had refused to promote him, stating that he still lacked experience and dumping him back under Kakashi's command on a newly reformed Team 7. She had expected him to rave and rant, but he took it in stride. That had been 2 years ago. It had been on October the 10th 1 year ago, his 16th birthday, that the shit really hit the fan. Tsunade had called him to her office and handed him a scroll protected with a blood seal. Dear Naruto, I don't have much time. If you're reading this letter, then you are either a Chunin or 16 years old. I want to apologize for the burden I'm about to place on you, but it's the only way to protect the village. The Kyuubi no Kitsune is attacking, and my only solution is to seal it into you using a forbidden jutsu. I'm sorry for placing this burden on you, but as Hokage, how can I ask another parent to sacrifice their child if I'm not able to do so myself? My last wish is that you be looked upon as a hero for your sacrifice, but I know that the village's fear might make that impossible. I hope you can overcome that and be a proud shinobi of the Leaf. I have no doubt that your godparents, Tsunade and Jiraiya, will support you when times are hard. You may be wondering about your mother. Her name is Uzumaki Kushina, and she's part of the Uzumaki clan. There's so much I could tell you about her, but I just don't have the time. I have to go now. Please know that I am truly sorry for the burden I'm placing on you, and that I'll always be proud of you. Love, your father. Namikaze Minato. P.S. I've left a scroll with all my personal jutsu and notes in the blood seal at the bottom of the letter. Use them well. Smiley face. Naruto had felt something die in him as he read those words. It was ironic. If he had found out just a few months before, he would probably have been glad to find out that his childhood hero was actually his father. There would have been some anger, but not enough to outweigh the happiness. But, for want of a few months, all Naruto could find in himself was bitterness and resentment for his so-called father. He had looked up at the woman he had once seen as a surrogate mother, the woman who was his godmother. But he had only seen a woman who had lied about his parentage. He had asked both her and Jiraiya if they knew who his parents were, and they had both lied to him. He could only see a woman who had abandoned him, then carried on as if all was right when she finally wanted him back in her life. He had left the office without a word. He hadn't called her Bachan since. After that, he had pushed himself even harder, training to the limit every day. His dream had once been to be a Hokage as great and respected as the 4th. Now he wanted to become a shinobi so powerful he would make his father look like a mere genin. He didn't do it for recognition, at least not only for recognition, he did it for himself. And, for the most part, he had succeeded. Akatsuki had been crushed, with only Madara and Sasuke remaining and most of the others dying at his hand. The Geto Mazo was currently buried miles under aim. The first 8 of the tailed beasts still locked inside. Iwa and Kumo had started getting a bit restless, but, with his strength being well known, he was enough of a dissuasion to keep them from attacking, thus stopping the 4th Shinobi War in the bud. Uzumaki Naruto was many things: a demon vessel, a sage, and one of only 3 ninja in the history of the elemental nations to be given a SSS rank. But at the moment he was just tired and angry. He was tired because, despite everything, he was now considered as just a run-of-the-mill average Konoha shinobi. Because people still call him the #1 surprising knucklehead of Konoha. Maybe his expectations were still too high, but the fact that, with all he had done, all the times he had saved the village, he was only given an indifferent tolerance when anybody else would be hailed as a hero and savior, well, who wouldn't be pissed? And lastly, he was angry, really angry, because he was now looking at another woman who had abandoned him just days after he was born. Uzumaki Kushina. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Uzumaki Natsumi groaned in frustration as she walked through one of the main streets of Konoha. At 17 years of age, she was used to the lustful looks she got whenever she was near men, but it never got any less bothersome. She was well aware that she was very good-looking. She was quite tall, standing at 5'6". Her vibrant red hair was tied at the back in a long ponytail that went all the way down just past her waist. At the front, two heavy, chest-length bangs framed her face and a fringe of thick locks covered her forehead. Her brows and lashes were dark and well-trimmed, bringing out her pale blue eyes. Her face was flawless, with a cute little nose and small, pink-lipped mouth. Despite being a competent kunoichi, her skin was creamy, pale, and incredibly soft. Her breasts were well-developed C-cups, her waist as narrow as a wasp's, her hips firm and curvaceous, and her slender legs went on seemingly forever. She was dressed in a revealing yet practical outfit that all Uzumaki girls wore. Black kunoichi boots that went just above her knees. Tight, black bicker shorts that stopped mid-thigh and molded her forms. She had a weapons pouch attached to her right leg with medical tape, black fingerless gloves on both hands, and a simple belt with the Uzumaki clan symbol on the buckle. Finally, her jacket was relatively bulky, with long sleeves, a high collar that covered the bottom of her chin, and a low cut that stopped just below her breasts, exposing her nicely toned belly. Even among the beauties that were the females of the Uzumaki clan, she was a cut above most, with only her mother and a few of her cousins being able to rival her looks. The Uzumaki clan was an old one, dating back to well before the founding of the first hidden village. The clan was both neutral to all conflicts and nomadic, never staying in one area for more than a few months, save a few exceptions. The true particularity was that all the members were female. There were males, of course, but, be they fathers or sons, they were only honorary members. This was due to the fact that the Uzumaki clan had a regenerative Kekai Genkai that only females could activate. It enabled them to dedicate a portion of their chakra reserves to healing their body. The more chakra they dedicated, the faster their regeneration, to the point where some, if they had large enough reserves, could not only regrow any body part, but actually stop themselves from physically aging. A prime example was her mother, the clan matriarch, Uzumaki Kushina, who at the age of 39 didn't look a day over 25. There were few who had large enough reserves to do so, very few, but those few could potentially live forever. The females also had the ability to instinctively know when a man was compatible. When they were in close contact, her chakra would flutter. The stronger the reaction, the stronger the compatibility. It didn't necessarily mean that he was the one, since the final decision was entirely up to the female Uzumaki. It just meant that there was a good chance that he was. The main reason the Uzumaki clan was nomadic was so that they could find their life partners. It was considered an honor to be chosen by an Uzumaki maiden, and it was many a man's fantasy. As such, the clan was always well received wherever they went. Natsumi herself had already met two men who were compatible with her, but in the end she had decided that neither of them would be her chosen. She sighed as she let her eyes scan the crowd that had formed around the Uzumaki caravans as they made their way to the area that the Godame Hokage had prepared for them. As always, there was a bit of everything. Prepubescent teens making fools of themselves in an effort to appear manly. A blue-eyed, golden-haired hunk scowling in what looked like a mixture of anger and disdain. Older men leering perversely. Hang on! Her mind came screeching to a halt as her eyes tried to relocate the scowling Adonis. She wasn't a vain person, in fact she was usually rather modest, but she had never seen a man scowl at her or the arrival of her clan. Women, yes, but never men. Seeing it now came as quite a shock. Especially considering how good-looking he is. A small voice whispered in her mind, causing a slight tinge of pink to rise on her cheeks. She finally saw him, or rather she saw the distinctive mop of golden hair as he walked away, jostling against the current of the ever-growing crowd. Her curiosity got the better of her. At the next junction in the road, she put up a camouflage genjutsu and discreetly slipped away from caravan. As soon as she was away from the bulk of the crowd, she dropped the genjutsu and set off. She had lost sight of her quarry, but since he wasn't trying to mask his chakra, he wasn't hard to track. She came to a stop near one of the training fields. His chakra signature had just vanished. She looked around with a cute, puzzled expression on her face, but couldn't see anyone. She almost jumped out of her skin when a deep voice spoke from directly behind her. Why are you following me? 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Naruto immediately knew that someone was following him. It wasn't an unusual thing. The council and even Tsunade often had a few NBU stooges tail him to make sure he wasn't up to something. It didn't really bother him. In a shinobi village, all flight risks were watched, except the spoilt Uchiha obviously, and Naruto had to admit that with his relatively sudden change of attitude and the way he isolated himself from his ex-friends. He was the perfect poster boy for flight risks. Of course, the fact that, when he wanted to, he could lose any ANBU tail they set on him in just a matter of moments made it a lot easier to bear. The thing was, he wasn't being followed by an ANBU. He had worked with most of the members of the various ANBU units, so, even if he had never seen their faces, he at least recognized their chakra. And the person who was following him, or more like tracking him from the way they were moving, had a chakra signature that he had never felt before. Feeling curious, he stopped at a random training area, hid in the top branches of one of the trees, and masked his chakra. A few seconds later, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen walked into view. He had long since lost his idiotic crush on Sakura. In fact, he often wondered why he ever found her attractive since both Hinata and Ino were better looking. He pushed the thoughts of his team made away when the red-headed goddess looked from side to side with an incredibly cute expression of confusion on her face. Deciding that he wouldn't find anything out from his perch in the tree, Naruto jumped down, landing behind her soundlessly. Why are you following me? 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Natsumi jumped and spun around, reflexively dropping into a defensive stance. She relaxed slightly when she saw that it was the person she was looking for, but she was still wary. How did he creep up on me? She asked herself as, even now that he was just a few feet from her, she couldn't sense him at all. I felt his chakra reserves earlier, even if he was restraining them. They're huge, but now, it's like he's not even there. Hello? She said tentatively. Naruto quirked an eyebrow at her. Hello, he said blandly. Now, if you don't mind, why are you following me? I was curious, she answered lamely. Naruto quirked an eyebrow and waited for her to elaborate. When she didn't, he sighed, wondering if it was worth the effort. Curious about what exactly? My name is Natsumi, Uzumaki Natsumi. I was wondering why you aren't, trying to get the attention of one of my clan. She trailed off, embraced at how pretentious her words sounded. She blushed heavily when he just stared at her, his expression a mixture of amusement and incredulity. So, let me get this straight. You followed me because I'm not a drooling mess staring at you and your clan's women like a love-struck puppy? Her blush increased at the words. She wanted to get angry at his crude statement, but she couldn't deny that that was the logical interpretation to what she said. No, it's just, you're the first. It's not that I want you to gra. She growled in frustration as she tried to find a way to put her thoughts into words. It's just that, everywhere we go men are always throwing themselves at us. I've had advances from men of every age between 8 and 80. I've seen married men trying to flirt with some of the girls from my clan when their wives were standing right next to them. She sighed and shook her head in exasperation. You're the first guy I've seen that hasn't been at least interested. So yeah, I was curious, she finished defiantly. Naruto stared at the girl. Beautiful girl, he added to himself before shaking the thought away. Truth be told, he had intended to have as little dealings with the Uzumaki clan as possible. He didn't know what his mother's ranking was, but given that she was walking at the head of the caravan, he suspected that she was fairly high-placed. All members of the clan would probably be treated like those of the other noble clans of Konoha. That meant that he really couldn't afford to get in a fight with her. He would probably lose what little leeway he had painstakingly gained. He sighed and looked down at her. Still, there's no reason to be rude. I'm not like the villagers. I'm not going to treat her like shit just because she's related to the bitch that abandoned me. I guess I can see your point, but what happens now? He asked. Well, I'm still curious. Can you tell me why you weren't even interested? Do you already have a girlfriend or a fiancé perhaps? Ha! Naruto couldn't help the spiteful laugh that burst from his chest. If the girl hadn't been a new arrival to Konoha, he would have assumed she was mocking him, which wouldn't have ended well for her. He had had 2 shots at a romantic relationship. First had been Hinata. She had confessed her feelings for him after he came back from sage training with the Toads and killed Pain. They had been together for a grand total of 1.5 months before he caught her making out with Kiba. The second had been Ayam. They had danced around each other for a while and even gone on a few dates, but in the end there were just too many obstacles for it to work. Her being a civilian and him a shinobi made things hard. The fact that she wouldn't be able to do anything to defend herself if his enemies tried to harm her made it too much for him to risk. She had understood and had even been grateful for his thoughtfulness. They had parted on good terms. She was now in a steady relationship with a dango shop waiter. Unfortunately for him, Naruto found that being near her, seeing what he could have had and imagining what could have been, was like a kunai to the heart. She had moved on and, slowly, Naruto had distanced himself from the Ichiraku ramen bar to avoid the pain he felt every time he saw her. He hadn't gone emo, of course, but it still hurt. Natsumi frowned at his response. She didn't think he was laughing at her. But still, "Hey, I was just asking a question. You don't have to be." No, it's not like that. It's just that, well, if you stay in Konoha for more than a week you'll see that the very idea of me getting a girlfriend is ridiculous. Oh, you mean you're... She trailed off, wringing her hands in a weird gesture that he failed to interpret. Huh. You know. Her gestures gradually became more evocative. Naruto blinked. You know. It clicked. Gay, he shouted, startling her. You think I'm gay? Hey, it's okay. You don't have to be. Everyone has their. I don't have a problem with you being. I am not gay, all right? Naruto shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her to make sure his point got through. He stopped when he saw her go stiff. Are you okay? He asked, worried. Yeah, I'm fine. Natsumi took a step back and fanned her flushed face with her hand while trying to calm her rapidly beating heart. Not only had she gotten a reaction telling her that he was compatible, but the usual flutter had been more like a resounding drum beat that made stars dance all across her vision. When she finally calmed down, she lifted her head to get a better look at him. He was tall, roughly 6'4" if she had to guess. He had spiky hair that looked like thick strands of gold. His eyes were a purple, similar to her mother's but quite a bit darker. His face could be defined as ruggedly handsome, though there wasn't any trace of facial hair. His skin was tan, more so than could be explained by simply spending a lot of time outdoors. His clothes were fairly standard shinobi attire in black with a few hints of orange. Finally, the hitayate was hanging loosely from his neck. She blushed again as her eyes glanced over his muscular form. So, you don't have a girlfriend? She asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. She wouldn't say that she had immediately fallen for the guy, but she certainly had found him attractive. She wasn't a shallow girl, but if it had been a ugly guy scowling at the Uzumaki caravan, she would have left him be. With the reaction she got from touching him, she knew that they had to be extremely compatible, so she was going to do her best to get to know him. After all, the whole reason why the Uzumaki clan was nomadic was so that they could find their chosen life partners. Naruto sighed. He didn't really like thinking about his life. It was depressing. From his meager experience, however, he knew that when a woman wants something, it's usually best to humor her. No, I don't have a girlfriend, he answered. I dated a girl for a month and a half before I found out the bitch was cheating on me. I had an almost girlfriend, but she was a civilian, so it didn't really work out. Natsumi forced back a grin as she heard his answer. Okay, in that case, would you like to? She was cut short when a carrier pigeon swooped overhead and dropped a scroll. Naruto's hand flashed out and snatched it from the air before breaking the seal and unrolling it. TSS, another mission, he mumbled. I only just got back for Kami's sakes. A flare of Katan chakra destroyed the scroll and he turned his attention back to her. Sorry, I've got a mission, so I'm going to have to cut his short. She nodded and he turned to leave. Wait, she shouted. I don't know your name. I'm Natsumi, Uzumaki Natsumi. Naruto. Uzi. He hesitated for a moment and then shrugged. Yeah. My name's Naruto. See ya. And he vanished in a blur of speed. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Uzumaki Kushina let out a sigh of relief as she plopped down on the couch in the living room of her tent. She had finally gotten rid of the suck-up Konoha Council members, and she could finally rest her weary feet. The Uzumaki tents were works of art. The creation method was a secret developed by an ancient seal master in the time when the clan was still in its youth, and passed down from mother to daughter through the ages. They were, on the outside, normal shinobi-style collapsible camping tents. On the inside, however, they were fully equipped houses with a living room, a kitchen/dining room, at least 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The tent usually housed the Uzumaki woman, her chosen life partner, and her children. It was tradition for the daughters of the clan to move into their own tent on the night of their marriage. Kushina giggled, a blush creeping up her cheeks, as she remembered the night, almost 19 years ago, when she moved into this tent. The moving wasn't the only part of the tradition. Uzumaki couples were very faithful. For the females, it was a value ingrained throughout their childhood. For the men, who were only honorary members, if they were ever discovered cheating on their wife, well, their punishment was far from pleasant. However, as a slight paradox to that faithfulness, each Uzumaki woman would choose a helper, usually a more experienced clanswoman, who, on the marriage night and after, would help spice things up a little. For Kushina, it had been her best friend. Minato had been a Kage, but he had been in well over his head, faced with not one, but 2 Uzumaki women whose regenerative bloodline limit gave them incredible stamina. In the end, he simply hadn't been able to keep up, and Kushina had spent more time playing with her friend than with him. She sighed again, this time with a hint of sadness. She had loved Minato, she really had, but sometimes she asked herself if she had made the right choice when she asked him to be her life partner. Usually, when a shinobi accepted to be an Uzumaki's life partner, he was relieved of his duties to his village and would travel with the clan without being marked as a missing nin. The only exception was when the shinobi was either a clan head, clan heir, or Kage. In those cases, the Uzumaki clan would stay in the village until a daughter was born, the man died, or he stepped down from his position of authority and followed the clan. Since Minato had been Hokage at the time of their marriage, the clan had stayed in Konoha. Shortly after, she had been pregnant, and 9 months later, she gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy. Then Kyubi attacked. She really couldn't understand that he was willing to sacrifice his own son to seal the beast away. For the Uzumaki, family always comes first. Nonetheless, she hadn't opposed him. Tradition stated that the father had final say over matters concerning the son, so there was little she could do. With his father dead during the sealing, the boy would normally have been raised in the clan until his 16th birthday. But the newly reinstated Sandaime Hokage had told her that little Naruto was to become a ward of the village according to his father's desires. Old Sarutobi had also told her that Minato wanted her to stay in Konoha, but she had shot the idea down quite firmly. She wasn't about to throw away centuries of clan tradition just to complete the dying wish of an honorary clan member. Still, she had often thought about little Naruto, wondering how his life had been without his parents. Like most Uzumaki, she favored daughters over sons, but that didn't mean she didn't care for him like any mother should. Now that she was in Konoha, she was quite anxious to see him. She was also scared of what his reaction would be when they first met. She grinned mischievously. She had already planned to give him a tour of the clan tents and make sure he met as many of the young Uzumaki girls as possible. With any luck, one of them would ask him to be their life partner, and she would get to make up for time lost when he traveled with the caravan. She lifted her head from its resting place when she heard her daughter walk in. Now there's a thought, Kushina said to herself. If Natsumi were to choose him as my life partner, not only would I get to spend time with him, I'm almost certain that she would choose me as their helper. Hi. She dissolved into mental giggles as the kinky images bounced around her head. For the Uzumaki, incest really wasn't a taboo. Their regenerative bloodline fixed any diseases and/or genetic abnormalities. That was the main reason the females of the clan were often called the Uzumaki angels. All weaknesses were overwritten, all strengths enhanced, and in the end their genetic codes were as close to perfection as possible. Kushina's eyebrows rose when she saw the slightly glazed look in her daughter's pale blue eyes and the tiny hint of pink on her creamy-skinned cheeks. Well, this is interesting. So, she asked, snapping the young woman out of her daze. Where have you been? Natsumi's blush increased and she dipped her head, trying, and failing, to hide it. There was a boy. I saw him when we were walking through the village, and Kushina's eyebrows rose past her hairline as her daughter mumbled her response. Natsumi was quite used to male attention, so for her to seek him out, he must be quite the specimen. What was this boy like? If he caught your attention so easily, he must be more than a little handsome. Impossibly, Natsumi's blush increased even more. Kushina could almost feel the heat radiating off of her. Well, it's not just that he's handsome. Though he really is, it's just that. It was strange. When I first spotted him in the crowd, he was practically glaring at the caravan. It was as if he hated the very sight of the clan. She trailed off as she suddenly realized that she didn't get an answer as to why he acted the way he did. Kushina frowned. For some reason she had a bad feeling about this. Why was that? Most men are more than pleased to see us arrive. Natsumi shrugged. I don't know. He got a mission and had to leave before I could ask him. But he was nice enough to me, so maybe I was wrong. Her face lit up. We touched, and I got the strongest reaction ever. It was as if all the chakra in my body was dancing. Kushina grinned at her enthusiasm. Really now? Did you at least get the name of this mystery man? Natsumi nodded happily. His name is Naruto. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Naruto-kun. Naruto turned around and, despite his sour mood, a grin crawled onto his face as he recognized the voice. Hey, Natsumi-chan, how are you doing? It had been 6 months since the Uzumaki clan had arrived in Konoha and they had gotten a lot closer. It had been awkward at first. It turned out that the mission Naruto had been assigned was yet another Sasuke retrieval mission. He had stopped counting the number of times the village had sent a team to bring the Uchiha back, as well as the number of ninja that had been lost in the effort. Naruto had been sent alone and he ended up facing not only Sasuke, but Uchiha Madara and the members of Team Taka. The girl Karen had been easy enough to deal with, but against two fully developed Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan, the origin of the curse seal, and a sword wielder who could literally turn his body into water, Naruto had had to use every trick in his considerable skill book. He had no idea how long the battle had lasted, but by the time they were done they had carved a path of destruction through 2 minor countries and halfway through another. It was only sheer dumb luck that they had avoided any towns and villages. The end result was 2 dead bodies, a lifeless puddle of water and a broken Uchiha Sasuke. The return to the village had been decidedly less glorious. Despite all the lives lost at the hand of the Uchiha, the general reaction had been consternation at the wounded state of the traitor. Even the majority of the ninja population seemed angry that he had been so savagely brutalized. As soon as he had passed the gates, medics had rushed forwards to tend to Sasuke's wounds. Tsunade herself had led the procession. It was a good thing that Naruto's healing factor was off the charts and his injuries had already healed, or he would have been left for dead. From what he had read about his seal, he should have lost his regeneration when he fully absorbed the Kyuubi's Yuki. But Naruto found that, after the demon's demise, his regeneration had increased to the point where he could regrow limbs in a split second. He could survive heart wounds, head wounds. In fact, he was fairly sure that, as long as his body still contained enough chakra, there wasn't any type of wound that he couldn't survive. He wasn't sure, but Natsumi and he had come to the conclusion that, somehow, he had activated the Uzumaki bloodline and, with his chakra reserves rivaling those of the greatest Bijou, he was damn near invincible. They had, of course, kept the assumption to themselves. He stifled a sigh as he waited for the red-haired beauty to catch up to him. To this day, I honestly don't know why I didn't just kill the arrogant ass and claim it was an accident. It probably would have made my life a whole lot more bearable. Sasuke had been up and about within 2 weeks, but it had been long enough for what little tolerance Naruto had gained to be lost, and for the mutterings of Demon and Kyuubi Brat to return full force. No one had yet been brave enough to attack him, but he was sure that, given time, they would assume the council would protect them and feel safe enough to do so. He pushed his dark thoughts aside and focused his attention on Natsumi, his sister. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Natsumi rubbed her temples as she walked down one of Konoha's larger streets. She had just wanted to go for a walk around town to stretch her legs, and she had ended up having to push back the slimy Uchiha's advances for what seemed like the 1000th time. What made it worse was that he had seemed particularly smug this time, as if he was in on some great secret. Ever since her brother had brought him back to the village, the Konoha Council had been trying to get her to choose him as a life partner. She didn't know whether it was so that the Uzumaki clan would stay in Konoha, or whether it was to satisfy the pampered brat's demands, but either way she had definitely had enough of it. It's a damn good thing we're leaving in a couple of days, she told herself. I'm this far from finishing what Naruto-kun started and ripping the fucker's head off. Thoughts of Naruto brought a small blush to her face. They had gotten closer over the months, a lot closer. They had spent a good bit of time talking, sparring, or eating together. They weren't exactly dating, but there had been quite a few cozy situations. When she had found out that he was, in fact, her twin brother, she had been worried. She didn't care about the taboo of incest. Truth be told, it seriously turned her on. But she had feared that he wouldn't want to be involved with his own sister. She needn't have worried, though, when she had expressed her troubles, in a rather indirect manner. He had simply shrugged it off and planted a chaste kiss on her lips. Though he hadn't known it, that had been her first kiss. The only unpleasantness was when Naruto met her mother. Natsumi had finally understood why he had been looking at the Uzumaki caravan the way he was when she first saw him. She hadn't been sure where to stand on that. She understood both points of view. She had been raised in the Uzumaki clan, so she knew that her mother had to respect Minato's decision on what happened to Naruto. But on the other hand, she could understand that Naruto felt as if Kushina had abandoned him, especially since he had told her what his childhood was like. Since the first meeting, Kushina had been trying to get to know him, but he had kept his distance as much as possible. Natsumi was fairly certain that it was only because of her that he was even civil with their mother. A glint of gold further along the street made her look up. Speak of the devil. Naruto-kun. Hey, Natsumi-chan, how are you doing? She rushed up to him, frowning slightly when she saw a clouded look flitter across his face for a moment before it vanished. Hi, I'm fine. I just got rid of that damn Uchiha team. She hid her grin when she heard him growl angrily. How about you? You look a bit down. Ma, I'm just getting tired of the shit I put up with, you know. He sighed and shook his head. Sometimes I ask myself why I don't just dump the village and go missing Nin. Sure, I'd be on the run for the rest of my life, but it's not like there's anyone left who can pose a real threat to me. Natsumi felt a burst of excitement course through her body when she heard he was thinking of leaving the village. So, you're considering? She was interrupted by a loud droning sound, rising and falling as it echoed across the village. What's that? She asked. It's the village alarm. You mean, there's an attack? No. Naruto shook his head and changed the direction he was walking in, pulling her along gently by the arm. If it was an attack, it would be louder and the rhythm would be faster. This is the signal for everyone to gather beneath to Hokage Tower. She's probably going to make an announcement of some sort. Do you know what it is? I have a hunch. She waited, but it didn't seem like he was going to elaborate, so she let it slide. Within an hour, every living soul in Konoha was assembled at the village square looking up at the balcony/roof of the Hokage Tower. Naruto and Natsumi chose a place near the back, so that he could avoid the thick of the crowd, and watched as Tsunade, the council elders and Sasuke walked into view. People of Konoha, the Godame announced loudly and clearly, easily getting everyone's attention. I've called this gathering to make you all aware of a new and promising development for the future of our village. The council and I have both agreed and selected, and so it is with great pleasure that I give you my successor, the Rokudaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, Uchiha Sasuke. There was a moment of silence as Naruto's hunch was proven correct, before the assembled citizens of Konoha burst into applause. Natsumi's jaw dropped. She didn't really care who led Konoha, but she was fairly sure the damned Uchiha was not good leader material. She turned to her brother/love interest to see his reaction. She knew that he no longer held his dream of being Hokage, but that didn't mean he would take the announcement well. She was also peripherally aware of a good number of ninja and mostly civilians looking at him, waiting for his reaction with barely restrained glee. Bastards, she thought. She was about to say something, though she wasn't quite sure what, when Naruto did something no one was expecting. He laughed. He laughed and joined in with the clapping. Naruto turned when he sensed his twin staring at him incredulously. He forced his laughter down to low chuckles, though it took considerable effort. What? He asked with a large grin. You've got to admit that it's pretty funny. He betrays the village to join its most notorious criminal, then joins the village's all-time greatest enemy. He kills a good dozen of the ninja sent to bring him back, and yet everyone still worships the ground he walks on. Konoha's idiocy just cracks me up. They were both silent for a while as they observed the villagers start to celebrate, congratulating the loyal Uchiha for his many accomplishments and praising their Hokage for her judicious choice of successor. Well, there's also the fact that he's still wearing Orochimaru's damned-ass bow. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Natsumi came to a stop as the Uzumaki camp came into view. They had left the village square as soon as the celebrations started. The walk had been calm, with all the villagers being towards the center, so she plenty of time to psych herself up for what she was about to do. Seeing her stop, Naruto turned with a raised eyebrow. Something wrong? She looked him straight in the eyes and, despite her nervousness, she steadied herself with a steely determination. I'm fine, but there's something I have to ask you. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. He had an idea where this was going, where he hoped this was going. We'll be leaving in the next few days and, she shuddered a little, surprised at how hard it was to carry on. And I really don't want to leave you. So, I wanted to ask if. She took a deep breath. Naruto-kun, will you be my life partner? Before she could react, a pair of strong hands gripped her waist, pulled her into a loving embrace, and her lips were engaged in a passionate kiss. She relaxed into the embrace as her nervousness left in favor of relief and happiness. She slid her arms around his back and rose on her tiptoes as she opened her mouth to deepen the kiss. They moaned into each other as they both felt their chakra react, fluttering in a synchronized dance as the newly chosen life partners drowned willingly in each other's touch. They broke apart and Natsumi rested her head against her brother, and soon-to-be husband's chest, reveling in the warm feeling it gave her. After a minute like that, she stepped back with tears of happiness shining in her eyes and a wide smile on her face. Seeing that he wore a similar expression of joy only made the moment more perfect. "Come on, Naruto-koi," she said, punctuating the last word by giving him a peck on the lips. "We've got to tell Oka-san so we can have everything set for when we leave." "Yeah," he replied softly, returning the intimate gesture. "I was thinking of leaving even if you didn't ask me, but this makes it so much better. Perfect, even." He gave her another lingering kiss and sighed. "You're going to want her to be our helper, aren't you?" She faltered as she was about to drag him to her mother's tent. His words bringing up the one problem she couldn't find a decent answer to. She nodded hesitantly, refusing to meet eyes with him. "Yeah. I always wanted her to be there with me for my first." Her voice wavered and she sighed sadly. "I know you haven't forgiven her, but—" Naruto cut her off with a finger over her soft lips, and she looked up to see him smiling at her with a bittersweet smile. "Hey, I've been hoping you'd ask, and I knew that if I said yes, she'd probably be the one you chose as helper." He shook his head ruefully. "I may not be able to get past the fact that she left me here, but if it's what you want, I'll give her the best fucking she ever got." Natsumi blinked and sweat dropped. At times her brother could be incredibly sensitive and romantic. At other times he could put his foot so far up his mouth that his knee would be covered in bite marks. "Right," she drawled. "Well, since you're so eager, let's get going, shall we?" 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Kushina blinked in surprise when she walked into her living room and found her twin children cuddling. Natsumi looked very comfortable as she sat sideways in Naruto's lap. She had her arms lopped lovingly around his neck, while he had his securely around her waist. They were both looking at her innocently, but from their slightly rumpled appearances she could easily tell that they had been otherwise engaged not so long ago. She smirked when she saw a thin string of saliva bridging the gap between their mouths. "Well, this is interesting." Her tone was filled with mischief and amusement. "By the way, you've got a little—" She pointed at the corner of her mouth and then to them. Their eyes followed and they both blushed when they saw what she meant. Natsuko got a grip of herself and looked at her with playful defiance, before licking the string of saliva away, making sure to dip her tongue into Naruto's mouth and never breaking eye contact with her mother. Kushina felt her eyebrows rise, her heartbeat quickening slightly as she felt a spark of hope. She had been sad that none of the Uzumaki girls had shown any special interest in Naruto. She knew that he had spent a lot of time with Natsumi, but until now she hadn't dared to get her hopes up. Does this mean? "Hi, I asked Naruto-kun to be my life partner, and he accepted." Natsuko's words were spoken so happily that her joy was almost palpable. "And we'd like to ask you to be our helper." Kushina almost fainted and only barely restrained herself from trying to dispel a genjutsu. It was just days before her clan had planned to leave Konoha, and the best outcome she could have possibly hoped for was suddenly coming true. She ran it through her mind just to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "My daughter and son are becoming life partners, and I'm going to be their sexual helper." She was especially shocked that they wanted her as a helper. While Naruto had never been rude to her, he had made it clear that he didn't really want anything to do with her either. She knew that it was the Uzumaki woman that made the choice of sexual helper, so Naruto didn't really have a say, but she doubted that Natsumi would force this on him. She looked to Naruto for confirmation. Naruto sighed softly when Kushina looked at him. "Yes, I agreed with it." He looked her in the eyes, her amethyst meeting his purple. Kushina was a beautiful woman. There was no doubt about that. 5'5" with a slender but curvy body that could make any man a drooling idiot. Long and fiery red hair that fell down her back in a single silky curtain, and pale, flawless skin that amplified her looks and gave her a slightly ethereal beauty. If Naruto was perfectly honest with himself, he would acknowledge the small voice in the back of his mind that was more than a little eager to find out what was under that Uzumaki kunoichi uniform. He shook the thoughts away. He wasn't a pervert, just a healthy male with a healthy libido. He sighed before continuing. I understand why you left me here, clan rules and all that, but it doesn't change the fact that you did leave me. Maybe if my life had turned out differently things could have worked out. But, as it is, I doubt that I'll ever consider you as a mother. Honestly, if it wasn't for Natsumi Haim, I doubt I'd have anything to do with you. But she loves you and, even if she doesn't say it, I know she'd like for me to at least give you a chance. So, yeah, we would like you to be our helper. Naruto gave a head bow before looking up at her with a small cheeky smile. Please teach me how to bring great pleasure to my life partner Kushina-sensei. Kushina chuckled as Natsumi bopped him on the head. She hit it expertly, but her son's smile had sent a warm tingle through her private regions. It had been almost 2 decades since she had sex with a male. She had often found some relief with the other single Uzumaki females, but fingers and tongues, no matter how skilled, couldn't compare to a good hard. No, bad Kushina. Still, I wonder how big he is. I was a little disappointed that Minato-kun was only average-sized. I can still remember the stories Okasan used to tell me about my father being 8.5 inches long. She shook her head to clear her thoughts before her mind went to the gutter. Well, there's some paperwork we have to fill in so that you can leave the village without problems, Naruto-kun. After today, it's obvious you won't be stuck here as Hokage and the Namikaze wasn't a clan, so things are straightforward. I just have to write up the marriage certificate, we all sign it, and I'll send a copy to Tsunade. Then we can get straight to the ceremony and move you both into your new tent. She finished with a slight blush on her cheeks that was mirrored by the other two as they understood what she was implying. Are you sure Tsunade or the council can't make trouble? Naruto asked with a bit of worry. I mean, even if they don't admit it, I am Konoha's greatest asset. They'll know that without me IWA and Kumo will probably get a lot bolder. She shook her head. No, the agreements were established long ago. If the man isn't the village leader, a clan head, or a clan heir, then the decision is entirely up to him. They can try and convince you not to leave, but in the end it's your choice. Okay, what are we waiting for? 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0. It didn't take long to fill in the marriage certificate and have the copy sent to the Hokage's office. The ceremony was fairly simple, with just the other members of the Uzumaki clan present. As a nomadic clan, they didn't see much point in having a grand celebration. With the parties for Sasuke's ascension to Rokudaime Hokage going on all throughout the village, both certificate and ceremony went unnoticed. And so, just as the sun was setting, Naruto carried his newly wedded wife and life partner bridal style into their new tent. Kushina walking just behind them with a large smile on her face and happy, pride-filled tears shimmering in her eyes. Naruto headed straight to the biggest bedroom and let Natsumi down on her feet. The sound of the door clicking shut made him turn to find Kushina already unfastening the ceremonial kimono she wore when she presided over the marriage as clan head. A rustling beside him told him that his sister-slash-wife was also undressing. Soon 2 elaborate kimonos lay pooled on the floor, and one thing became strikingly clear. Neither had bothered to wear any underclothes. Naruto felt his mouth go dry as Kushina walked sexily over to her daughter, and they stood side by side. They were both true visions of beauty. He let his gaze travel south, drinking in the sight of their round bosoms and pink nipples, their flat bellies and narrow waists, their curvy hips and long, slender legs. He gulped when he saw their pubic areas, the short, well-trimmed hairs shaped into matching Uzumaki clan symbols, a single clockwise swirl held in a circle. He absently noticed that they were both a little damp in anticipation of the activities to come. Mother and daughter shared a pleased smile at his odd reaction. Go on, Natsumi-chan. Kushina gave her a gentle push forwards. Go and help your life partner undress. The young wife stepped forwards and knelt to help his remove his shoes. She got back to her feet and untied the obi that was tied her husband's waist. When that was done, she slowly parted the kimono, sliding her hands down his muscular arms and letting it drop to the floor, leaving him in nothing but a pair of black and orange boxers. Natsumi licked her lips in approval before once again dropping to her knees. She took her time, letting the tips of her fingers explore the smooth details of his well-defined and rock-hard muscles. When she saw a twitch from under the cloth covering his equipment, she looked up at him with a grin on her face. In one swift movement, she pulled the last piece of clothing all the way down to his ankles. The 2 women gaped at the weapon that was revealed, just as dazed by the sight of his naked body as he had been by the sight of theirs. In a trance-like motion, Natsumi grabbed hold of the thing in both hands and squeezed it experimentally, making it swell and harden until it was at full mast. "Sweet Kami-sama," Kushina whispered as she took a step forwards to make sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. "How can it be so big?" Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly, making Kushina gulp at the sight of his flexing muscles. It had been a long time since she was with a man. Natsumi was still staring wide-eyed at the monster cock in her hands. "Well," he started, looking down in embracement. "When I was a kid, I overheard some kunoichi complaining about useless shinobi with small penises. Back then I still wanted to be Hokage, and I figured that I couldn't be the best Hokage ever if I was a useless shinobi with a small penis, right? So, well, at the academy the instructors had told us about channeling chakra into muscles to make them stronger." "You channeled chakra into your..." Yeah. Obviously it didn't work, otherwise all the guys would do it. But the thing is, when I tried really hard the chakra turned red. Obviously that was because I was tapping into Kyuubi's Yuki, but at the time I just thought it meant it was working." Kushina wasn't sure what to think. She had always cursed the fox for what it cost her. But now, "I found a copy of Ika Ika in the old man's desk. Didn't really understand most of it, but there was a bit where the girl was very happy with the man's 8-inch tool. So I kept going until I was 8 inches. Kushina blinked and looked back at his cock, still in her dazed daughter's hands. She looked back at the owner of said cock with a puzzled expression. 8 inches? I may not have taken a tape measure to it, but I was 10, Kushina-san. Natsumi managed to blink herself out of her daze and look up at her brother/husband. "And an 8-inch penis at the age of 10 becomes a 13-inch monster by the age of 17, she said, finishing off his train of thought. She twisted around, although she never released her hold, and looked at her mother with pleading eyes. "Oka-san, what do I do?" "What do you mean, Natsumi-chan? I am here to help and give pointers, but I'm sure you at least understand the basics. I have explained all this to you, Natsumi-chan." "I know, but it's just so big." Naruto felt one of his eyebrows start twitching as the two women argued. "Oi, would you mind not acting as if I'm not here?" Kushina sighed and gently pushed her son towards the bed. She could understand her daughter's plight. For a virgin, the sight of Naruto's monster cock was rather intimidating. Now, more than ever, she was glad for the Uzumaki tradition that allowed her to help her daughter through this important moment of her life. "Come on, Natsuko-chan, I'll help you get started." Naruto backed up as his mother gently pushed him to the large, soft-looking bed. Part of him wanted to snap at her. He hadn't lied when he said that he understood why she had left him, or when he said he was willing to give her a chance. But that didn't mean that there wasn't some resentment left. Still, he forced his anger down and focused on the pleasant side of the contact, letting her move him into a lying-down position with his dick sticking upright like a flagpole. "Move up, Naruto-kun, so we can get on the bed too." Kushina made a shooing gesture to punctuate her words. "Come on, Natsumi. Let's get started. I'll help you in the beginning for the foreplay, then I'll let you get to the really good stuff." Naruto felt his 13-inch cock throb as the cord-like veins pulsed with the large amount of blood pumping through them. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the two stunning females knee walk up the bed and come to a stop on either side of him. He could tell that his wife was hesitant, mostly following her mother's actions, and he felt a small pang of guilt knowing that it was because of the abnormal proportions of his tool. He caught Kushina's eyes and gave her a thankful look, to which she just smiled. "Go on, Natsuko-chan," she coaxed. "Start by giving him a long lick. I know it's a bit intimidating. Hell, he's actually twice as long as your father was, and I won't even try to compare the thickness. I won't lie, it'll make things harder and more painful to begin with, but trust me when I say that, once you get used to it, you'll be thankful." She leaned over to her daughter's ear and finished in a whisper. "I'm actually jealous, Natsuko-chan. Imagine how good that big, fat, rock-hard cock will feel, throbbing, inside of you." Natsumi shivered, in pleasure this time, at her mother's lustful tone. She looked down at her husband's cock as it twitched to the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the first cock that she had even seen. She had seen pictures before during her studies on human anatomy, but this was the first time she actually saw one. The best way to describe it was that it was more than she had expected. Steeling her nerves, she lowered her head until her mouth was level with his large, to match his cock-shaved ballsack. She stuck out her tongue, flattening it against the underbelly at the very base of the meat pole, and slowly, tentatively, drew it all the way up. The tip of her tongue flicked across his piss slit when she reached the top, sending a trill of pleasure through her body. Natsumi felt all her nervousness melt away. Unlike some of the stories she had heard, it didn't taste great. His cock didn't have some heavenly flavor that drove her into a sexual frenzy. No, it tasted nice, but it would be the same taste if she licked any other part of him. It was the act itself, the fact that she was licking this big thing, his big thing, that really turned her on and washed away her uncertainties. With a pleased smile, she got back to work. Kushina felt her juices pooling in her moist folds and trickling down her smooth thighs. She bit her lower lip to hold back the moan that threatened to escape as she watched her daughter tend to her son's big cock. It was obvious that she didn't have much skill, and even less experience, but the enthusiasm with which her tiny pink tongue was sliding over Naruto's manhood, leaving glistening trails of saliva, made the older Uzumaki burn with desire. Traditionally, the helper didn't join in until the first fuck, so to speak, was over. Kushina staunchly believed in respecting tradition, but she also knew that a little bending of the rules now and then never hurt anyone. With that thought in mind, she moved beside her daughter. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed in pleasure. Most assumed that Naruto wasn't a virgin, what with the time he spent with the notorious pervert that is Jiraiya, and the fairly well-known fact that he had helped ensure the next generation of priestesses in the land of demons. The truth was that, before today, the most Naruto had done was a few heated kissing sessions with Hinata and Ayam. He had either been too busy training, or too tired from training to spend time in the brothels with his sensei. Not that he would have wanted to anyway, and the help he gave Cheyenne had consisted of him masturbating and filling a few cups with his seed. Apparently they had a method that ensured that the child was a daughter, that involved processing the semen and killing all the male parts. The warm feeling of his wife's slick tongue on his cock was incredible. The fact that she was willing to lick him there filled him with both love and lust. He groaned as she covered more and more of his member with her saliva, the warm air of the bedroom making his damp skin prickle. Natsumi had been happily lapping away at her life partner's shaft when she felt her mother sidle up to her. She turned her head and found herself looking into a pair of amethyst eyes, hovering bare inches from her own blue ones. Just as she opened her mouth to ask what was wrong, she felt her mother's hand slide across her round bum, and her fingers trace along her wet slit. She moaned as her sensitive area was expertly teased with a feather-light caress that made the heat in her belly climb little by little. Kushina smiled at the reaction she was getting and leaned into her daughter's ear. Now, Natsumi-chan. Don't forget what you're supposed to be doing." Natsumi nodded and went back to licking Naruto's cock, trying to find where he liked it best. It was harder to concentrate now. The gentle fingers brushing against her pussy were very distracting, and the slowly rising heat wasn't helping either, no matter how good it felt. "Why don't you use a hand as well, Natsu-chan?" Her mother's voice was soft and tempting, almost hypnotic as she whispered in her ear, warm breath brushing over the side of her face. "Wrap one of you hands around the base and stroke it." She followed the suggestion, putting the weight on her left hand and lifting her right hand up to grasp Naruto's meat. Natsumi knew she didn't have large hands. In fact, they were rather dainty, but not being able to get her fingers around his girth was still rather daunting. She didn't allow that to stop her though, and felt an odd sense of satisfaction at the copious amounts of saliva. Her saliva, that coated his cock, making her hand stroke up and down with ease. With her hand taking care of the lower half of the large shaft, Natsumi brought her mouth back to the upper parts. In a bout of inspiration, she nipped the skin on one of the throbbing veins, then liked it, making sure to trail over the same spot and drawing a groan of pleasure from Naruto that encouraged her to do it again. "I think he's ready for you to move on to the next stage now, Natsumi-chan." Her mother's voice came again, just as enticing as before. "Take him in your mouth." Natsumi rubbed the flat of her tongue on the underside of his cock as she wrapped her lips around the fat head and gently slid down. Naruto groaned in pleasure as the first few inches of his meat were enveloped and his sister's hand moved faster. Naruto grit his teeth as his loins tightened, struggling to hold back as long as possible. Kushina grinned as she watched her son's expression. His face scrunched up as if in pain, with only his moans and grunts telling the truth of what he was actually feeling. Wanting to see him go over the edge, she nibbled on her daughter's earlobe and pressed her fingers just a little bit harder as she massaged the outer lips of her virgin pussy. "Just a little bit more, Natsumi-chan," she whispered huskily. "Swirl your tongue around his big fat cockhead. Flick it inside his piss slit. Rub him hard and make him come." Natsumi followed the directions to the letter, working her tongue around so fast that Naruto felt as if there were a dozen at the same time, teasing his piss slit so much that it was gasping open and shut as it prepared for the finish, and stroking her hand up and down, hard and fast, adding in a twisting motion in her eagerness to please. Naruto gave a final grunt and shot his load in her mouth, unable to control himself long enough to give a warning. Natsumi almost choked in surprise. She pulled away, coughing from the powerful blast of cum that hit the back of her throat. Kushina's grin widened and she licked her lips as she watched the scene unfold. She had seen the telltale signs of Naruto's release, but she didn't warn them. It was the best way for them to learn. She watched as her daughter pulled back coughing and the thick strands of spunk splattered across Natsume's face and in her hair. A few splashes even hit her own face, and she wasted no time in cleaning them off one by one with a finger before popping it in her mouth, moaning at the slightly salty taste. Naruto looked up in time to see Kushina push his wife onto her back and lean over her face. His cock had softened slightly, but it sprang back to life as he watched her start licking the strands of cum off of Natsume's face. When Natsume recovered from the unexpected cum shot, she swirled her tongue around the load in her mouth, testing its flavor and texture with curiosity as her mother lapped at her face. Her eyes closed and she moaned when she felt her brother's face between her legs as he went down on her already stimulated pussy. Her mother's fingers had brought her dangerously close to orgasm, and she knew she wouldn't last long. She clenched her thighs to the sides of his head as he licked her puffy nether lips up and down, flicking her clitoris every so often, sending gratifying bolts of electricity through her body. When Naruto dipped his tongue into her, she lost it. Naruto-ke. Kuinai, I'm coming. Naruto swallowed as hard as he could, gulping down the sweet fluids that were flowing from his sister-slash-wife's wet cavern. When the stream finally came to an end, he leaned back and admired the naked forms of the two beauties, one shivering in the afterglow of her orgasm, the other playing shamelessly with what was still left of his spunk. Kushina looked up at him, a small trail of semen dribbling from the corner of her mouth. Good job, Naruto-kun. Now, I think you should get a move on. With the size of your tool, there's going to be quite a bit of pain for her, so you should make the most of her current condition. He nodded dumbly, took his cock in his hand and lined it up with Natsume's moist entrance. He met eyes with her for a moment and, despite her dazed expression, she gave him a small nod. With a slow thrust, he pushed the bulbous tip in, stretching her out as her pussy lips struggled to accommodate his thick tool. She whimpered in a mixture of pleasure, but mostly pain as he continued the motion and drove into her virgin tunnel. Like most serious kunoichi, Natsume had broken her hymen at a young age because of her training, but that didn't prevent her from being incredibly tight. Naruto stopped his slow thrust when he felt the tip of his cock hit the back of her cavern. Looking down at where they joined, he could see that he still had a couple of inches to go before he bottomed out. He also saw, much to his dismay, that there was a small trickle of blood, diluted by her sexual fluids, seeping out from between their joined organs. He winced when he saw Natsume bite her lower lip in an effort to stifle her pained whimpers. He leaned forwards, intending to ease the pain with a heated kiss, but had to stop when the change of angle almost made him blow his load. He gave a grateful look to Kushina as she did it in his place, gently taking Natsume's attention away from the pain with her soothing lips. When Natsume's body began to relax, he seized her hips and pushed the last few inches of his cock in until his pelvis was pressed against hers. He closed his eyes, basking in the searing warmth of her quivering sheath. Natsume panted as her mother pulled away and looked deep into her eyes. Kushina then got behind her, snuggling the back of her daughter's head between her ample breasts and propping her up so that they could both get a good view of the action. Natsume's eyes widened when she saw her life partner's thick meat stuffed all the way into her tight snatch and moaned in pleasure as she suddenly became very aware of the hot throbbing inside of her. Her mother had distracted her mind from the pain long enough for the Uzumaki healing to take care of it. Now all that was left was the pleasure, the warmth, and the sensation of being filled more than she had ever been in her life. Naruto took the change in position and the blissful moan as his cue to start moving. He slowly pulled half his length out, finding the red trails of blood oddly erotic now that he was no longer actually hurting his lover, and then pushed back in just as slow. Natsume moaned and scrunched the sheets in her fists as the wonderful friction made her toes curl. Her moans turned to breathless pants as her brother's shaft sawed in and out of her at an agonizingly slow but regular pace. She desperately wanted him to go faster, but she was only just hanging on as it was. She saw spots dance in her eyes as each thrust pushed her closer and closer to the inevitable release. When her mother's hands traced up the perspiring skin of her belly, up the firm curves of her heaving breasts, and started to pinch and tease her erect nipples, Natsume felt her dam breach and her pussy walls started to constrict sporadically in mini-orgasms. Naruto gripped her hips tighter as her soft vaginal walls started convulsing around his length as if they were trying to milk him of his seed. He sped up his tempo a little but forced himself not to go too fast, swaying his hips back and forth firmly as his balls churned and his cock quivered in anticipation. Natsume started feeling more and more faint as wave after wave of pleasure ate away at her consciousness, blocking out any manner of coherent thought. Her mother's right hand kept fondling her sweating bosom and teasing her stiff nipple, while her left hand slid back down and brushed over her clitoris before starting to pinch and pull on it. That, coupled with the steady sawing of Naruto's thick cock, triggered her into a full-blown orgasm, showering her juices down the length of her partner's shaft as her hot and wet pussy walls convulsed wildly around it. As she slipped into blissful unconsciousness, the last thing she felt was an elating flood of warmth as her brother-slash-husband spilt his potent semen directly into her womb. Naruto let out a heavy sigh as he released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His eyes were half-lidded in ecstasy as his thick steamy cream pulsed up from his sack and out of his meat tube. It wasn't the fast, thick rope strands he released after Natsume's hand-slash-blowjob. It was an almost continuous stream of spunk that ebbed and flowed with the rhythmic contractions of his member, filling his wife with his essence. When his cock stopped pumping its batter into her, Naruto regretfully pulled out of his sister's tight sheath. He rested on his haunches as his cock started to soften, watching with satisfaction as, despite her being unconscious, Natsume's snatch sealed shut, thanks to her Uzumaki healing no doubt, greedily keeping all of his seed inside her. Kushina gently shifted her daughter to the side, arranging her so that she could rest comfortably and recover from her first sexual encounter. She looked up as Naruto leaned forwards and stroked the sleeping young woman's hair affectionately. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked, a bit nervous. Kushina placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled reassuringly. "She'll be fine. You went nice and slow, and even if you've probably got the biggest cock in all the elemental nations, you didn't hurt her too much. On the contrary, she's passed out from all the pleasure you've given her. You were very good for your first time, very considerate. From what I've heard, a lot of men get too caught up in their own pleasure to care for their woman." Naruto winced a little guiltily. "Yeah, I almost did the same. I really had to stop myself from letting loose and plowing into her." Kushina leaned forwards, bending low so she could lay soft kisses on his slightly bloodied cock. "That just goes to show how much of a real man you are, putting your own selfish pleasure aside for you lover." She brought a hand up and started fondling his large balls as she switched from kisses to licks, gradually cleaning his hardening shaft. Naruto moaned loudly as her warm silky tongue worked over his dick, and he ran his fingers through her hair in encouragement. He was a bit ashamed of it, but he was feeling really horny and he didn't think he could wait for Natsume to recover. It was also evident that Kushina was much more skilled in her pleasure-giving. The way her soft tongue ran over his pole and her hand massaged his sack was nothing short of amazing. Suddenly Kushina pulled away and got off the bed, drawing a disappointed groan from Naruto. She chuckled sexily as she grabbed his monster cock and pulled hard, forcing him to follow her as she led him over to the dressing table. The table itself was both wide and deep, made out of a dark brown and sturdy wood. The mirror was just as wide and in perfect condition. It offered a crystalline and undistorted reflection of their naked forms as they walked up to it. With a sweep of her free arm, Kushina cleared the table surface, sending everything clattering to the floor, and sat on it, never letting go of Naruto's pulsing meat. She stroked the insides of her heels up and down his powerful thighs a few times, before hooking them behind his waist and using her long slender legs to pull him towards her. "You can let loose with me, Naruto-kun," she whispered huskily as she gave his cock a squeeze and presented its thick tip to her dribbling entrance. "I have more experience and better control over my regeneration, so you can plow me as hard and as fast as you want to-kun." Taking her words to heart, Naruto pushed his hips forwards just a little, forcing his head past her tight lips. Kushina moaned loudly as her nether regions were invaded by something other than a woman's fingers for the first time in over 17 years. The fact that it was spreading her wider than anything she had ever experienced, except giving birth to her children, only served to fill her entire being with a burning desire. Naruto looked up and frowned when he saw a vacant expression in the red-haired goddess' eyes. Despite his willingness to give her a clean slate, there was still some anger and resentment inside him. He grit his teeth and shifted his hips to better align himself. He grabbed the edges of the table for leverage and, with one single and powerful thrust, he speared his entire length into her. Kushina had always been a bit of a wild lover. From the times when she played with her female cousins when she was younger, to the time she spent with Minato before his death, and again the activities with some of the other clanswomen since. The thought of Naruto splitting her apart with his thick meat sent her mind straight to the gutter. She had a niggling feeling that she was forgetting something rather important, but she just couldn't focus enough to work out what it was. Her distraction left her unprepared for Naruto's harsh penetration. Naruto quickly pulled back, leaving only an inch of his member inside her smoldering fleshy cave. She was just as tight as Natsume, but the walls of her vagina parted fluidly, molding and clinging perfectly around his length. He set a fast pace, lunging in and out relentlessly. Kushina was forced to lean her hands out behind her to brace against the forceful thrusts. She screamed her pleasure as her son's pelvis slapped against hers, her flowing juices causing a wet sound of flesh on flesh to reverberate throughout the room. She moaned in delight as his throbbing meat log slammed into her at super speeds, digging into her womb far deeper than she had ever dreamed of. She threw her head back, struggling for breath as he bent over her and savagely latched his mouth onto her left boob. He licked and bit her stiff nipple roughly, just the way she loved it, before switching to the right. She hooked her ankles around his back as he hammered into her, each stroke feeding the fire in her belly until it was like a roaring furnace of lust burning inside her. Naruto grunted like an animal as he fucked her as hard as he could. He quickly found that she wasn't lying. She could take the punishment he was dishing out. What made it even more pleasurable for him was that she wasn't loosening at all. If anything, the successive orgasms he was giving her only made her tighter. Her pussy walls seemed to have a life of their own as they rippled and clamped around his cock. He found that, for some reason, he was already lasting longer than he had with his wife. Maybe it was because of the fast pace at which he was screwing her. Maybe it was because he had already blown out the first nut inside Natsumi. Either way, he felt as if he could go on like this forever. He discarded the thoughts and concentrated on the naked woman before him, her breasts heaving up and down as she drew ragged breaths, her head thrown back in pleasure, leaving her hair to trail on the dressing table surface, her jaw working open and closed in a silent scream. He bent over and licked her throat roughly, lapping up the salty sweat that was purling all over her skin and giving her body a ethereal glow. Kushina felt her arms going numb from absorbing the shock from the ruthless pounding. With as much strength as she could muster, she reached her left arm up and grabbed him by the shoulder. A few thrusts later, she managed to do the same with her right. Panting breathlessly, she dipped her head and stared at her stretched-out pussy and the thick log of a cock that was drilling in and out of her, sending splashes of sweat and pussy nectar flying each time he bottomed out. With a final effort, she pulled herself up, wrapping her arms around his muscular neck and squishing her ample tits into his rock-hard chest, hanging on to him with all she had. Naruto switched the position of his hands, moving them from the edge of the table and grasping her firm butt cheeks. He lifted her ass up before slamming it down to meet his thrust halfway. Kushina's wails climbed even higher at the depth and strength of the penetration. For another half hour he pounded into her, never reducing his pace or changing position since he was quite happy with the one they were in. Kushina ran her tongue up and down a patch of her daughter's husband's shoulder, sensually cleaning it from the sweat that was pouring down his body. If she hadn't been an Uzumaki, she would have screamed herself hoarse by now, but as it was, her body was holding up just fine. Her mind, however, was flooded with lust from the multiple orgasms she was being supplied from the roughest sex she ever got. All she could think about was that last burst of ecstasy when he would finally flood her boiling pot with his steamy cum. Seeing a small area of skin shining from her saliva gave her a wicked idea. She waited a few moments, counting the brutal thrusts Naruto was spearing into her. 1, 2, 3. And bit down hard on his shoulder muscle. She moaned in pleasure as it worked, and the sudden pain forced Naruto's orgasm at the exact moment his cock slapped back into her. Her eyes rolled back in their sockets as she was flooded by two hot and thick liquids. A flow of warm red blood pulsing over her tongue and down her throat, and thick ropey blasts of semen splashing against the back of her womb. Naruto grunted at the sharp pain in his shoulder and felt his balls clench before they started emptying themselves into the wild redhead clinging to him. He dug his finger into her butt cheeks as he pumped blast after blast into her willing cunt, the long build-up from the rough sex causing him to give her even more than he had given Natsumi. When he was finally spent, he put her bum back down on the dressing table and unhooked her arms from around his neck. "Sweet Cammy, that was great." He licked his lips in appreciation as he looked down at her naked form, legs dangling and back collapsed against the mirror as she panted in recovery of the intense coupling. Much like Natsumi, her snatch had sealed shut the moment he pulled out, only a few spurts of the huge load he dumped inside her having leaked out. He pressed his hands behind his hips and bent backwards to stretch himself out a little, his still erect cock jutting out in front of him. Seeing that his wife was still asleep, he grabbed Kushina and flipped her around, bending her over the dressing table so that her ass was sticking out at him. Kushina was basking in the after-sex feeling and the warm feeling of Naruto's seed in her womb as it sloshed around as if it had a life of its own. A small frown marred her beautiful face. "Why do I feel as if I'm forgetting something important?" she asked herself. The question was blown to the wind when Naruto flipped her over. She was about to tell him to give her a moment when his large hands spread her butt cheeks. Her eyes widened like ramen bowls when she felt his warm, rough tongue lick up her crack, and she thanked Kami that she had taken the time to properly wash herself there. Aya, na narutito keikuin. She moaned as his long, spongy tongue pushed into her asshole, wriggling around as it explored her bowels. The only anal play she had had until today was a few fingers. Minato had categorically refused anything other than regular sex, and none of the other Uzumaki girls had ever gone this far. The thought of her own son's tongue digging around in her nasty ass was so naughty it almost made her come straight away. She managed to hold on for a while, but when he pushed a little deeper and started working his jaw, the edges of his teeth grating over the sensitive flesh that surrounded her dark hole, her body was once again racked in intense orgasmic pleasure. Naruto pulled back when sweet pussy juices started to trickle down her thighs. He rubbed his cock against her leaking pussy lips a few times, coating it with generous amounts of the precious fluid, before bringing his cock up to her tightest hole. Kushina bore down when she felt Naruto's fat dick head press against her asshole, and she clutched the edges of the table. She felt the hard muscles of his chest press against her back and looked up at the reflection in the mirror just in time to see him give her a vicious smirk. Her eyes bugged out and her mouth opened wide in a silent scream as he slammed into her, pinning her down with the force of his thrust and impaling her with his long, thick, throbbing member. His pelvis flattened her pillowy rump as he invaded her bowels, stretching her more than she had ever thought possible. He didn't give her time to brace herself as he started working his length, hard and fast, in and out of her tight tunnel. Each outstroke he pulled all but the tip of his shaft out before slamming back into the hilt with the instroke, making her bottom ripple with the force of impact. Kushina started moaning happily as every single one of her anal nerve clusters were stimulated over and over by the thick tool. She stared at her reflection and was only slightly surprised to find that there was a small string of drool dribbling down from her chin. Her mouth stuck wide open in a erotico of pleasure. Naruto moved his hands from her rump to her slim waist and used his firm grip to pound her even harder. He closed his eyes as he felt the tight warmth and the incredible friction on his member bringing him to his limit. Unlike with her pussy, he didn't think he could last long this time, but he was determined to get as much of her ass as possible. He grunted when her intestines shifted unexpectedly, and he tipped over the edge, unloading thick ropes of cum deep into her gut. Kushina moaned as her bowels were flooded with her son's spunk. She could still feel the load in her womb, and now the second one deep up her ass was almost too much for her. She shuddered as the waves of pleasure kept washing over her body and gave a pitiful whimper when Naruto pulled his huge shaft out. Naruto grinned as he watched her gaping asshole shrink and close. It was an even hotter sight than seeing her pussy seal up. He gently picked up her shivering form, finding her surprisingly light, and placed her down on the bed near Natsumi. He then crawled up between the two beautiful red hair goddesses and wrapped an arm around them both. He let out a small satisfied sigh as he closed his eyes. "Damn, that was incredible," he said to himself with a mental smirk. Soft, gentle love-making with Natsumi, followed by rough, wild sex with Kushina. One hell of a marriage night. I don't think it gets any better than this. Suddenly, he felt a soft hand trace down his ripped abs, slide across his thigh, and grab hold of his half-soft cock. He snapped his eyes open when he felt a warm mouth place a tender kiss on his lips and came face to face with a re-energized Natsumi. Then again, maybe it does? "Hey, Naruto-kun," she whispered huskily, leaning down to peck his lips with another loving kiss. "You ready for round 2? He smirked up at her, eyes full of love, lust and mischief. "You bet." 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Uchiha Sasuke wore his trademark arrogant Uchiha a smirk as he patted down his Kage robes. He, along with Tsunade, the members of the council and a good number of villagers, were waiting by the Konoha gates for the Uzumaki clan caravan to make its way out of the village. He wasn't actually Rokudaime Hokage yet. The inauguration ceremony was planned for next week, but the council had wavered the usual traditions and allowed him to don the Kage robes early. He hadn't seen the dobe yet. In fact, nobody had seen him since the announcement of his status as successor, which was slightly disappointing since he wanted to rub it into the idiot's face. He was also rather annoyed that none of the Uzumaki had attended the celebrations since he had intended to use his new position to convince the heiress of the clan into marrying him. He straightened his back as he saw the caravan arriving with the clan head Uzumaki Kushina in the lead, his smirk growing a little wider. Now that his new position had been announced, he was sure he could get the woman's daughter to marry him. Then she would have an unfortunate accident, and Natsumi Uchiha Uzumaki would take her place. As her caring husband, he would have her settle the Uzumaki clan into a permanent residence in Konoha as a branch family to his own clan. He already had plans to impregnate as many, that is to say all, of the Uzumaki females to breed a new and even more powerful generation of Uchiha. It may be common knowledge that their bloodline only activated for the women, but he knew that it was possible for it to be activated in a male. Yakushi Kabuto, Orochimaru's right-hand man. He was dead now, killed by the dobe, but Sasuke had seen firsthand just how hard the medic was to kill. Unfortunately, the activation of the silver-haired shinobi's bloodline had been a freak occurrence during one of Orochimaru's many experiments, and all attempts to recreate the effect had failed miserably. But the last Uchiha wasn't worried about that. With medics such as Tsunade, Shizune and Sakura, he was sure that his clan would soon be in possession of two of the most powerful Kekai Genkai in all the history of the elemental nations. Sasuke watched distractedly as Kushina and Tsunade traded polite goodbyes, his eyes scanning for his target amongst the faces of those leaving. When he saw her, he took a step forward, but froze when he saw who she was walking with. "Dobe?" he asked incredulously. His shock quickly turned to anger when he got a clearer view and saw that the dobe was holding Natsume's hand as they walked. Naruto hid his amusement and just raised an eyebrow, further increasing Sasuke's ire. "What do you think you're doing dead last? Get away from..." "Is there a problem, Uchiha-san?" Kushina's voice interrupted the Sharingan wielder's rant. He saw that not only Kushina, but Tsunade and most of the council had turned their attention to them. The Godame was the first to see what had caused his outburst, and her eyes widened when she saw Naruto holding Natsume's hand. The blonde-haired Kage looked him up and down, seeing that he was dressed in traveling clothes. "Naruto?" she asked in shock. She hadn't seen him since his last mission, and she had been surprised not to see him during the celebrations because she expected him to come and demand to know why he wasn't chosen as her successor. Her eyes darkened when she saw that he wasn't wearing his Hitai-8. "What's the meaning of this? Where do you think you're going, and where is your Hitai-8? Rather than Naruto, it was Kushina who answered. "Hokage-sama, surely you jest?" she asked with a rather fake scandalized expression. "Did you not read the document I sent you?" Tsunade looked at her owlishly while the rest stared in interest. "What document?" Kushina frowned slightly, hiding her amusement as she played her part. "I'm sure the celebrations must have been distracting, but you shouldn't neglect your duties." She paused a moment for effect. "But, since you haven't taken the time to attend to your paperwork, allow me to introduce you to my daughter's chosen life partner, Uzumaki Naruto." The silence that followed was deafening as the most influential figures in all of Konoha went slack-jawed in shock. The civilians started murmuring between themselves, with the die-hard Naruto haters looking very pleased with the development since it would rid them of the brat. The ninja, however, looked anything but pleased. They fully understood how much losing Naruto would weaken the village. Elder Koharu stepped forwards with a deep frown on her face. "I am sorry, Uzumaki-dano, but we cannot allow the boy to leave the village." The civilians' mumblings came to an abrupt and shocked stop as one of the demon brat's most staunch detractors tried to prevent his departure. "Really?" Kushina asked with a raised eyebrow. "All the required documents have been filled in. Their marriage was performed by myself and was perfectly legal. Do you intend to revoke agreements that have been in place since the very founding of this village?" "No, of course not, Kushina-chan," Tsunade said hastily. She knew how powerful the Uzumaki clan could be. They were all very competent kunoichi, and with the stamina and durability they gained from their bloodline, they were a force to be reckoned with. They certainly wouldn't win an open fight with Konoha, but they would cause a lot of damage. "But if Naruto has married a member of your clan, then we will have to arrange for your prolonged stay in Konoha." Kushina frowned a little before she replied. "I think not. After all, he isn't a clan head or clan heir. And since you announced that Uchiha Sasuke was your successor, he obviously isn't Hokage. Those are the only situations in which my clan stays in a shinobi village." Tsunade looked to Naruto as if hoping that he would come to her support, but he just smiled a chilling smile at her. "I've left my Hitai-8 in my old apartment, Hokage-san," he said, looking her right in the eyes. "I won't be needing it anymore." He gave his wife's hand a squeeze and they walked off, leaving a mixture of confused, angry, and fearful people behind. Those were the last words he would ever speak within, or even remotely near, the walls of Konohagakure no Sato. Chapter 2. Ota-san. A 24-year-old Uzumaki Naruto looked up from his book and smiled as he saw his two 5-year-old daughters, Uzumaki Amaya and Uzumaki Aiko, walk into the family tent. He chuckled as Aiko ran across the room and happily threw herself into his waiting arms, acting for all the world as if she hadn't seen him in months rather than the few hours they had been out training. If there was one thing anyone could say about her, it was that she was an incurable daddy's girl. Not that he had a problem with that. He loved his daughters dearly, both of them. The only physical differences between the two girls was that Amaya's hair was slightly darker and her eyes were the same amethyst color as Kushina's, whereas Aiko's hair was, in fact, a little lighter than most Uzumaki girls, though still very much red, and her eyes were sky blue. Other than that, they looked like perfect twins. The truth, however, was quite different since Amaya was roughly 2 weeks older than Aiko. Naruto winced slightly as he remembered the circumstances behind their birth, or rather, his wife's reaction. Turned out that, on the wedding night, Kushina forgot to use a contraceptive jutsu, and with the copious amounts of potent seed that Naruto had pumped into her rather fertile womb, they had found out that she was pregnant a week later. /N. I don't think that pregnancy can be detected that soon, but for the sake of my FIC, let's just say that there's a jutsu that can. To add insult to injury, Natsumi, who had also forgotten the contraceptive jutsu, hadn't been pregnant despite the even larger quantities of cum that he had injected into her. Understandably, Natsumi had been rather upset with her mother for not only bearing her husband's child, but for doing so before her. After that, Natsumi had made sure that Naruto put every effort into conceiving a child of her own. A week of almost non-stop sex sounds great in theory, but by the time his wife was satisfied that she too was with child, Naruto, despite his high-level Uzumaki regeneration, had never felt so sore, drained, and downright exhausted in all his life. "Otu-sen, are you okay?" Naruto came back from his trip down memory lane to see Aiko's cute little face just inches from his, staring at him with an even cuter worried expression. "I'm fine, Aiko-chan. I was just thinking about some fun, but slightly painful memories." He shifted her onto his left leg and motioned for his other daughter to join them, and she promptly did so. Amaya wasn't quite as affectionate as her half-sister, but she was very fond of her father. Since she was also Kushina's daughter, she had a room in both tents/houses, so she did spend a little less time with him. Aiko looked at her father with worry painted all over her cute young face. "If it's painful, I can kiss it better for you, Ota-san." Naruto made a show of giving it some thought. "It's not so bad that it needs a kiss, but I can think of something that'll make it all better." Both girls looked at him expectantly, eager to find out how they could help their father. "What, Ota-san?" Naruto's face split into a wide grin. "Feet tickles." Both girls had very ticklish feet. After half an hour of chaos, the girls surrendered to the merciless and evil Tickle Master and settled back down on his knees. "So girls, how's the training going?" Naruto smiled as they both started bouncing up and down enthusiastically at his question. They had started training at the age of 3, even though it had just been some exercises to get them in good condition, and Naruto was proud to say that they were already shaping up to be excellent kunoichi. He was fairly sure that that had to do with the seal he had created and placed on them. The seal was actually the answer to a problem that Naruto and Natsumi had quickly come to realize. Whilst Naruto had large enough chakra reserves that he would be able to use his Uzumaki regeneration to stop his aging, Natsumi didn't. He could, of course, do what the other Uzumaki in his situation did and let himself fade, preventing his bloodline from stopping the effects of time so that he aged normally. But he found that that was a bit of a waste and decided on a different idea. He created a reinforced clone with the equivalent of roughly 2 taels worth of chakra, and then sealed it into his wife in a similar fashion to the way the bijou were sealed into a Jinchuriki. The combination of the Uzumaki bloodline and the clone making sure not to feed too much of its chakra into the seal ensured that she didn't suffer from chakra overload, and within a year or so her reserves were at the level of the Nibi. More than enough that she was impervious to the passing of time, and nothing short of her entire body being destroyed would be able to kill her. Seeing the success of the seal, Naruto and Natsumi had applied it to both their daughters shortly after their birth. Kushina, Naruto, Natsumi, Amaya and Aiko were now pretty much immortal and fairly near invincible. A lesser version had also been given to all the women of the Uzumaki clan. They could stop their aging, but it didn't make them quite as resilient as Naruto's main family. After a half hour of listening to them talk about their training, Natsumi came out of the kitchen and told them it was time for dinner. Once the meal was over, there was a short story time and it was time to go to sleep. After tucking his girls into bed and giving Aiko her extra hug from her Ota-san, Naruto joined his wife in their room. "Are you feeling all right, Naruto-koi?" she asked when he slipped silently into bed next to her. "You seem a bit troubled." "No, I'm okay," he sighed softly. "I just can't help but worry about the war, you know? We've managed to stay completely out of it so far, and things have calmed down compared to the beginning, but I get the impression that it'll be a while before there's any sort of peace again." The Fourth Great Shinobi War had officially started 3 months after Naruto's departure from Konoha, just long enough for IWA and Kumo to make sure that it wasn't a bluff of some sort. Konoha had made an effort to recover Naruto by sending a load of Root A and BU, but he had been expecting them and had crushed them before they could do any damage. He didn't know if it had been an order from Sasuke, a decision of the council, or Danzo acting alone, but either way he had made short work of them. He didn't know exactly how the war started, but he did know that the first real battle had been an assault on the walls of Konoha, by both Kumo and IWA, that would have ended up in a stifling stalemate if not for the timely arrival of Tsunade reinforcements. One by one the other villages had been dragged in, although from what he heard Kiri stayed out of it for as long as they could, having barely recovered from their own civil war a few years prior. The elemental nations were now, once again, littered with scorched battlefields, ruined outposts, and plundered border towns. The Uzumaki clan had temporarily settled down in the Land of Waves and adopted a sedentary lifestyle. Once the war was over they would take back to the roads so that the single clanswomen could find their chosen ones, but for now it was too risky. On the upside, their presence in Wave had left the area mostly untouched by the conflict since none of the villages wanted to attract Naruto's wrath. Natsumi snuggled up to her life partner's bare chest and stroked it softly in small, calming circles. "Don't worry, Naruto-koi," she whispered. "Everything will be fine." Her hand slid downwards and she reached into his sleeping boxers to grasp his cock, giving it a firm squeeze to get the bloodstream flowing. She was instantly rewarded as he started to harden under her ministrations. In the meantime, Naruto grinned and pulled her on top of him, guiding his shaft to her tight entrance. 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0. "Hey, Ota-san, Oka-san." Naruto and Natsumi looked up from their spot on the couch, pausing in mid-snuggle at their daughter's interruption. They were now both 37 years old, although they didn't look a day past their mid-20s. They hadn't had any more children since they were quite content with the 1, 2 for Naruto, that they had, and to prevent any more accidents both Kushina and Natsumi had had the permanent seal version of the contraceptive jutsu applied to their lower regions. The seal was mostly hidden by the small patches of pubic hair and could be removed if they ever wanted to, but so far there were no such plans. Their family life was, in Naruto's opinion, perfect. He had daily sex with at least one of 2 red-headed goddesses. Always hard and rough with Kushina since that was how she loved it. She had gained a particular fondness of taking his monster cock up her ass. A fondness that Naruto suspected came from the dressing down Natsumi had given her for falling pregnant. With his wife the sex was usually tender and loving, although from a non-Uzumaki point of view it would probably be considered quite rough. Natsumi liked it best when they were kissing during the act, ranging from sweet pecks on the lips to smoldering full-mouthed tongue wars. It was a symbol of intimacy and a mark of their love since Naruto had never kissed another woman since the day he married her. His daughters had grown into beautiful women and extremely competent kunoichi. Like their mothers they could easily be classed as S-rank, and with their father being the only SSS rank in history that made their family and their clan incredibly powerful. Amaya had moved out of the family tent when she was 16. She had been lucky enough that she had pretty much stumbled upon her life partner, finding him wounded and unconscious, washed up on the shore of the Land of Waves. She had chosen one of her favorite female cousins as helper. Aiko was currently seeing a boy to whom she had had a reaction. Although Naruto was glad that she had found someone, since it was becoming rarer and rarer for the Uzumaki women to meet a potential life partner, what with the heavily decreased number chakra wielders as a result of the war. He couldn't help but feel that the boy wasn't anywhere near good enough for her. Then again, maybe he was just being an overprotective father. Natsumi smiled softly at her daughter as she toed the floor nervously. She looked like she was 7 again, had just been caught pulling a prank. The young mother moved over a little so that the girl could join them, and wasn't surprised when she quickly plopped herself into her father's lap. After a few minutes getting comfortable in her new position, Aiko was interrupted by her father placing a finger under her chin and tilting her head up to face him. The tiniest of blushes colored her cheeks at the intimate gesture. "So, you going to tell us what's bothering you, Ai-chan?" She hesitated before forging on. "I asked Toshiro to marry me, and he said yes." Naruto's world came screeching to a halt. That wasn't a welcome development. He had been happy for Amaya when she married her life partner, particularly since he quite liked the guy. But as ashamed as he was to admit it, Aiko was different. He had never treated his daughters differently. He loved them both unconditionally, but in his heart of hearts he knew that Aiko held a special place. He wasn't sure if it was because she was Natsumi's daughter, if it was a response to her daddy's girl affection for him, or if it was the result of something else entirely. It just was. The fact that Naruto didn't like Toshiro one little bit didn't make things any easier. He looked at her severely, but not unkindly, giving her his no-nonsense face. "Are you sure about this, Aiko-chan?" he asked seriously. "I know things have been getting hard lately, and very few of the girls have managed to find their life partner since the war started. But that's no reason to make a hasty decision. Are you absolutely sure about this?" Aiko nodded once, firmly. "Hi, Ota-san. I want him to be my husband." He gave a mental sigh. "Well, it's her choice to make, and as her father I should respect that. Even if I don't like it, I just hope she isn't making a mistake." "Well then." He forced a smile onto his face, for his daughter's sake, and hoped that it didn't appear too strained. "I guess congratulations are in order." Natsumi smiled fondly as her twin brother, husband, and most importantly, life partner, hugged their daughter. Her mind, however, was racing a mile a minute. Unlike Naruto, she had picked up a very important detail. Aiko had never called Toshiro her life partner. Legally, that is to say outside the clan, there was no difference. But for an Uzumaki woman, comparing the title of husband to that of life partner was like comparing boyfriend to husband. They may use the two terms equally in everyday talk, but life partner held a lot more significance. The fact that Aiko hadn't used the term when announcing her decision to her parents spoke volumes about her true feelings. Natsumi got a sinking feeling in her heart as she had a fairly good idea of where this was going. She though a moment, wondering how to confirm her suspicions. "Congratulations, Ai-chan," she said warmly, giving the young woman a kiss of the cheek. "So, have you thought about who you want to choose as helper?" Aiko looked down and blushed heavily, but not before Natsumi caught her take a surreptitious glance at her father. She paused and took a deep breath before blurting out her answer. "I want to be with Tusen." Natsumi's eyes darkened almost imperceptibly as her fears were confirmed. She didn't have a problem with her daughter's choice of helper. She was just worried that it might hide something deeper. Nonetheless, she didn't want to call Aiko out on it, so there was nothing she could do other than hope that things turned out for the best. Naruto, on the other hand, was lost by the high-speed talk and hadn't understood a word of her answer. "Sorry, Ai-chan? Could you say that again, please? Maybe in a language that the rest of us actually understand," he asked jokingly. I want you to be my helper, Ota-san." Naruto's jaw worked up and down a few times in shock before he turned to his wife. Natsumi-chan, is that allowed? Though the helper was supposed to be another Uzumaki girl." She shrugged. "I think it should be all right. The helper is supposed to be another Uzumaki. The reason it's always been a girl is because men are only considered honorary members of the clan. So technically it wouldn't be allowed. But since you have the bloodline, you're considered the first full male member of the clan, which makes it perfectly acceptable." Naruto nodded in understanding and looked at her intently. "What about you? Are you okay with it?" "If it's what she wants, then I'm completely okay with it," Natsumi answered in complete honesty. She smirked. "I'm actually going to get a box of high-grade kumosake from Okasan with this. We made a bet years ago on who we thought our daughters would choose to be their helpers. Guessing that daddy's girl would want her daddy was a no-brainer." Aiko huffed and crossed her arms, pouting playfully at the nickname the entire clan seemed to know her by. She quickly switched to a happy smile and jumped over to hug her mother. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Naruto, clad in only a light kimono over his naked figure, watched as daughter and son-in-law prepared to consummate their marriage. This was not something he was looking forwards to seeing. The ceremony had gone well enough. Kushina, who was still clan head, had presided over the occasion as usual. Toshiro had seemed happy, thrilled even, to be marrying such a beautiful woman. Naruto thought that Aiko looked a bit unsure of herself, but he supposed that that was his daddy instincts playing up in a last-ditch effort not to see his baby girl leave the family nest. When Aiko chose him to be her helper, he still couldn't bring himself to say, or even think, their helper. He had been oddly pleased. In hindsight, it shouldn't have been much of a surprise, but he hadn't really considered the idea before she mentioned it. Then again, he had, as much as possible, avoided thinking of her getting married whatsoever. Yes, he was looking forward to helping her. The fact that she was his daughter didn't give him a moment's pause, considering that the only women her had ever had sexual encounters with were his twin sister and his biological mother. Incest was practically his middle name. What he had conveniently or inconveniently forgotten until this exact moment was that the helper didn't participate in the first round. So he was going to have to sit here and watch as some young upstart deflowered his precious little girl. He shook his head and forced himself to watch Aiko was laying prone on the bed in her newly acquired tent house. He took a moment to admire her naked form. Physically, she was strikingly similar to her mother. Only the innumerable hours spent exploring Natsume's body allowed to pick out the differences. The subtly fuller breasts, the slightly longer legs, the marginally lighter hair color. He felt his member harden. Her head was turned away from him, looking to the wall on the other side of the room as Toshiro climbed on top of her and settled himself between her legs. Naruto frowned as he gave no warning before thrusting in. Bastard. Sure, he's not even half my length and he can hardly compare to me in the thickness department, but he should at least ask if she's ready. Naruto's mood went from bad to worse as the brat immediately lost himself in his own pleasure and started swaying his hips back and forth selfishly. The angry father growled lowly as the boy made rhythmic grunts of appreciation. Suddenly a small whimper escaped his daughter's lips and Naruto felt his patience snap. As soon as Toshiro's penis entered her, Aiko felt a wave of nausea crash over her. She almost screamed out in disgust and pushed him away, but somehow managed to bite down on her lower lip and keep quiet. Her eyes welled up as he started driving in and out of her virgin pussy. He wasn't large, in fact his member was pathetically small as far as she was concerned. After all, she used to take baths with her father and, even if it was years since they hadn't done so, she could still remember just how big he was. What brought tears to her eyes was that with each thrust, with each time his groin slapped against hers, her chakra seemed to rebel against her, causing an indescribable sensation of wrongness. And Uzumaki was always faithful to their chosen life partner. It wasn't exactly a clan law, it was more like they were incapable of making love to any man but their life partner. There was, of course, the inexplicable exception of the helper. For some unknown reason, an Uzumaki female could have sexual intercourse with another Uzumaki's husband when she was chosen as their helper. And therein lied Aiko's problem. Toshiro wasn't her life partner. Both Amaya and she had found that they had a strong reaction to their father when they were in their early teens. They had decided to keep it a secret between them because it was something never heard of before in the clan history. Amaya had been lucky enough that she had met the man who would later become her life partner, and with whom she had an equally strong reaction. Aiko hadn't been so lucky. With time, the reaction had only grown stronger. It had become urging. She knew that she could explain the situation to her parents and they would help her figure something out, but she couldn't bring herself to do so. She didn't want to find another candidate. She wanted him. But she also wouldn't even begin to consider trying to come between her mother and father. So she had come up with a solution. It wasn't a very good one, but it was the best she could put together. She had found Toshiro. The reaction she got from him was tepid at best when compared to her father. She had procrastinated for a while, hesitating to go forwards, knowing that she would be violating the Uzumaki way, but eventually she had gone ahead and asked him to marry her. The plan was simple. Yes, she would have to be with another man, a thought that revolted her, but at least she would be with her true life partner without coming between her parents. She clenched her eyes shut as silent tears slid across her face. She kept her head turned resolutely towards the opposite wall so that her father wouldn't see her face. A single sob broke loose as Toshiro started grunting in pleasure, and she felt bile rise up her throat. Tremors started to shake her body as he chakra lashed out at her, burning her from within as she tried to find the strength to keep going. Just a bit more. Just a bit more and I'll be with Ota-san. Slowly, her mind went blank. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. Natsume was sitting on the bed in her and Naruto's room. She was wearing a comfortable set of pajamas, the type she used to wear to slumber parties when she was a kid. This wasn't her usual bedroom attire. Normally she wore a modest nightie that gave Naruto easier access for their fun. But tonight she was waiting for something. She had a bad feeling that she would need to leave the warmth of their room and deal with some unpleasant business. She was just waiting to see if her hunch was proven right. A sudden explosion of killer intent, that she easily recognized as Naruto's, gave her the answer. Using the flying thunder god technique that he had taught her, she disappeared in a flash of yellow and reappeared in Aiko's new bedroom thanks to the seal on his chest. It was a standard thing in case there was a problem. Every member of their family had an invisible flying thunder god seal somewhere on their person. She instantly became aware of the problem when she saw Naruto was standing on the bed, one hand clenched tightly around Toshiro's neck, lifting him up high. Her gaze shifted to Aiko's prone figure and she paled when she saw that her eyes were closed, She was drenched in sweat and convulsing lightly in short spasms. Naruto-kun, stop messing around with Toshiro and come here. Aiko's convulsing. Naruto unceremoniously dropped the younger man on the floor, where he crumpled into an unconscious pile and rushed over to his daughter's side. What's happening? He asked in a panic. I don't know. Tell me what happened. Naruto frowned as he tried to work out what happened. In his anger at the way his daughter was being treated, he had gone straight for the guy's neck, literally, and hadn't kept an eye on her. I'm not sure, he answered in worry. They were consummating the marriage, but he wasn't taking care of her at all. He was just focusing on his own pleasure. I even heard her sob. It pissed me off. I pulled him off of her, and next thing I know you were here. The worried father pulled his daughter into a hug, holding her to his chest lovingly. Natsumi held back a frustrated sigh. She noticed that Aiko's trembling had lessened a bit and frowned before finally letting the sigh escape her lips. It looks like my fears were justified. But how can... Naruto-kun, can you build up your chakra, please? She asked in sudden inspiration. I want you to envelope her with it and see if it helps calm her down. Naruto obeyed without hesitation, his chakra roaring out and easily flooding the room. The effect was instantaneous. Aiko sagged in relief, molding herself against her father's muscular frame as the invasive and sickening sensation she was experiencing vanished from her body. She could feel her chakra calming itself, cleansed by the overwhelming presence of her father's chakra surrounding her. Her eyes flickered open as she came back to her senses, and she clung to him, balling her fists in the fabric of his kimono. Another set of arms encircled her, and the warmth of a female torso pressed into her back. Her mother's voice whispered gently into her ear. It's okay, Ai-chan. You're going to be okay. After a few minutes sandwiched between her parents, Aiko was calmed down enough that Natsumi continued. Ai-chan, we need you to tell us what happened. Everything. Aiko sniffled, burying her head further into Naruto's chest, but nodded. The cat was out of the bag now. She would have to fully explain herself. And she did. She told them everything. Her reaction to Naruto as a teenager. Her realization that he was the one she wanted as her life partner. Her plan so that she could be with him without barging into their relationship. And finally the horror that that plan caused her to experience. For a while there was silence as the two parents took in their daughter's confession. Naruto looked straight into his wife's eyes, his voice cold and determined. I don't care if he's innocent in all of this. He hurt my baby girl and I'm going to kill him for it. Natsumi sighed sadly but nodded. She didn't see it as some form of revenge like Naruto did. It was just that leaving him alive would bring forth far too many complications. She sighed again. We'll need to explain things to the other members too. She looked at her daughter and smiled softly. As strange as it was, she felt that things were turning out all right. That their daughter would soon be joining them, because she had every intention of making the girl's dreams come true, and having her recognized as Naruto's second life partner made her feel as if things had gone full cycle. As wrong as it may sound, Natsumi was eager to taste the juices of her own flesh and blood, to suck her brother's thick cum out of their daughter's young pussy and savor the taste of their combined fluids. She shook her head to clear it of those arousing thoughts. Tonight would be about Aiko, not her. She pulled away regretfully. I'll take care of Toshiro. You two, take care of each other. She finished with a suggestive wink, making Aiko blush and Naruto grin. Natsumi bent down and surprised her daughter by kissing her full on the lips, going so far as to brush her tongue into the younger woman's mouth, before pulling away and vanishing in a flash of yellow with Toshiro's unconscious body. Dazed by her mother's incredible kiss, Aiko took a while to notice that her father had started moving, carrying her bridal style. Before she could ask where he was taking her, they were in the bathroom. She briefly saw a shadow clone before it dispelled, the sound of running water telling her that it had been sent ahead to fill the bathtub. Without letting go of his daughter, Naruto shrugged off his kimono, letting it fall to the floor and leaving him as naked as the girl in his arms. He carefully stepped into the bath and sat cross-legged with Aiko in his lap. Aiko sighed happily as the warm water washed over her, cleaning the cold sweat from her skin. She stretched her legs out in front of her, grinning as she wiggled her toes, causing ripples on the surface of the clear, soothing liquid. With another happy sigh, she leaned backwards, allowing her back to rest against her father's muscular chest. She blushed. The last time she had taken a bath with him, she couldn't have been older than 9 and hadn't had any sort of sexual thoughts. Her blush increased as she remembered thinking of her father's penis as Daddy's big sausage. As if reacting to her thoughts, she felt his member start to harden beneath her and press up into her left thigh. She giggled childishly and wriggled her bum, only to gasp when the movement allowed the fully erect shaft to snap up between her legs and slap against her crotch. She looked down and had to stifle a second gasp as she took its size. While she knew from memory that it was big, she had only ever seen it in its limp state. Now that it was at full mast, it passed from its base underneath her and up between her slender but still well-developed thighs. Yet from what she could see, it was still long enough that over a third of it was fully visible. Acting without thought, she squeezed her thighs together, capturing the pulsing log and holding it in place. Her lips twitched upwards when she heard a low, approving groan from behind her. Encouraged, she grasped the shaft in her left hand and the bulbous head in her right. With her left hand, she squeezed him firmly as she stroked up and down at a slow, steady pace. With her right hand, she rubbed the head in rolling circles as if to polish it. Naruto groaned a bit louder. He slipped his hands around her waist, making her moan at the intimate touch. One went up to her firm breasts and started gently kneading the fleshy globes, alternating between right and left. The other went down to play with her clit, teasing it expertly. Aiko threw her head back, resting it against her father's broad shoulder as she moaned in delight. Her moan was muffled when Naruto tilted his head and covered her mouth with his, wasting no time as he engaged her in a sensual battle of tongues. Her inexperience betrayed her, and Aiko soon found herself dangerously close to the edge of her release. She accelerated the pace of her pumping as she felt her coils tighten, hoping to bring her father over with her. Naruto smirked into the kiss and slid his hand lower, leaving his thumb to brush against her clit as his middle finger pushed ever so slightly past her pussy lips. Aiko's world exploded into spots of bright light as her dam broke, releasing her pussy syrup into the bath's hot water. She screamed in pleasure even as her father's tongue continued to plunder her mouth. Naruto didn't stop his ministrations, however. Her brushed the pad of his thumb over her taut nipples, sending tingles of electricity through her boobs. His finger curved into her squirting passage, rubbing against her damp vaginal walls as they clenched repeatedly. When her vision started to clear, Aiko's hands went straight back to their previous actions, determined to even the score. Naruto grinned, recognizing his own never-back-down attitude in his daughter. Taking up the challenge, he pushed another finger into her tight passage. Their tongue battle recommenced with a new ferocity as each tried their best to outdo the other. Naruto pinched his daughter's nipple but quickly switched back to rubbing when she flinched. Unlike Kushina, she obviously didn't like it rough. Even Natsumi liked him to be a bit forceful in his pleasure, giving so the apple must have fallen far from the tree. This only made him smile, as it would make things more interesting. Aiko's hands worked overtime, going as fast and hard as they could, as she felt her second orgasm descend on her at alarming speeds. Just as she reached her peak, her efforts were rewarded as the hand massaging his cockhead was plastered with hard spurts of thick cream. The contact immediately pushed her to her second's release, and both father and daughter moaned into each other as they coated the other's hand with their cum. Aiko turned her head to the front and lifted her hand up, admiring the white blotchy mess in her palm and hanging between her fingers. Experimentally, she brought it up to her mouth and gave it a tentative lick. Her eyes lit up as she tasted her father's seed for the first time, instantly deciding that it was her new favorite food. She eagerly lapped at her hand, silently bemoaning that it had been diluted and some of it washed away in the warm water. When she had liked up every last dollop, she turned her head and looked her father in the eyes, her face a mere inch from his. "That was yummy, Ota-san." Naruto grinned and pecked her on the lips. "That's good, baby, because you'll be drinking some every day from now on." Aiko brought her arms up and joined her hands behind his neck, interlocking her fingers so that she could keep the position easily. She eagerly engaged her father in another tongue battle, her enthusiasm making up for her lack of experience when compared to him. As they made out, Naruto kept his eyes on her tits. The elevated position of his daughter's arms caused them to rise up, inviting, almost begging him to play with them. Who was he to resist? He brought both of his large hands up, cupped them around her warm soft buns, and began massaging them skillfully, paying special care not to be even the tiniest bit rough. When the slow stimulation became too much for her to bear, Aiko pulled back just a smidgen, so that their lips were still brushing together. "Please, make me yours, Ota-san." Naruto's hands slid down to her slim waist and took it in firm but comfortable grip. When he spoke, his voice was a husky whisper, full of love and promise. "You'll always be mine, baby, Daddy's little girl." He lifted her up, his strong arms taking the weight effortlessly, and positioned her moist entrance just above the tip of his throbbing cock. Aiko kept her hands behind his neck for balance, leaving the rest of her body limp and relaxed as a sign of her absolute trust in him. Once again remembering not to be rough, Naruto slowly dropped her down, steadily impaling her on his long, thick shaft. They both moaned out in pleasure as Aiko's soft bottom pressed into Naruto's lap, his monster meat sheathed to the hilt in her tight quim. Bliss. If she had died and gone up to heaven, she was sure that it wouldn't have felt as good as she did now. Aiko didn't moan as her father's oversized cock occupied what seemed like every last millimeter of her pussy and womb. Moaning just wouldn't do the feeling justice. This was the cock that sired her, and it was stretching her in ways even her dreams hadn't matched. The dreams that she had been having since her teenage days, the fantasies that she had concocted in the heat of masturbation as she moaned for her father, they had all been met and exceeded in a single thrust. It was the exact opposite of Toshiro. Felt right, wonderful, perfect. Her chakra was singing joyously, increasing the sensation exponentially. Somehow, she knew that even her mother hadn't felt this good on her first time. After all, Aiko had desired, wanted, needed this for years. The wait had only made the moment sweeter. Suddenly it was too much. She screamed. Naruto smiled as his daughter's scream echoed off the walls even as it continued to rip from her throat. This time he didn't cover her mouth with his. He let the sound of her pleasure ring loud and clear as he held her firmly in place. When she finally quieted, he lifted her limp form up, dragging it all the way to the top of his member, before gently pushing it back down. She screamed again. Naruto set a slow grinding pace, showering loving kisses on the crook of his daughter's neck as he lifted her up and down the length of his shaft. He reveled in her screams of pleasure as his throbbing meat pole navigated her velvet folds with utmost care. The pace was slightly faster than his first time with Natsumi, but it was also much more restrained since he was now a very experienced lover. With each thrust, he took careful note of Aiko's reactions, slowly but surely cataloging all of her sweet spots. After a few minutes of this treatment, she reached her limit. Her tight vaginal walls fluttered around her father's shaft as they became slick from her flowing juices. Naruto moaned loudly into her neck but continued fucking her on his rod, lifting her limp form up and down like a sex doll. Aiko slowly grew used to the pleasure that was overloading her senses, and hummed happily when she felt her father's tongue licking the sweat from the side of her neck. When she felt her body climbing towards yet another orgasm, she tried to tighten her pussy walls as much as she could in an effort to bring him with her. It took a while, especially since she was making sure to stay lax in his hands, but her chakra responded instinctively, helping her body condition itself to bring as much pleasure as possible to her life partner. Naruto grunted as his daughter tightened her slick tunnel around his shaft. He kept the slow pace, sending vibrations through her as his chest rumbled in a deep groan of pleasure. Unlike Kushina, and to a lesser extent Natsumi, Aiko's tightness opposed no resistance to the penetration of his meat log in her womanhood. She clung to him, warm and wet, rubbing every part of his length and girth, molding herself perfectly around his endowment as it invaded and retreated from her snatch over and over again. Aiko's eyes fluttered open. She looked deep into her father's gaze, melting into the love and lust that conveyed. "You're fucking me, Ota-san. You're making me feel so good." Her voice was heavy, panting from intense pleasure. "I'm yours, Ota-san. Only yours. Forever. Fill me up, Ota-san. Fill your daughter with you come." Her words provided the final stimulation and Naruto spilt his seed into her wanting womb, flooding her depths with warmth. Aiko let out a silent scream of ecstasy as her father's throbbing meat splashed its batter into her, each pulse sending a stream of his love into the very core of her being. Naruto moved his arms around her belly, pulling her to him and holding her securely as they both rode out their orgasms, combining their sexual fluids in the well of her convulsing cavern. They stayed like that for a while, cuddling even after the flow of their juices stooped. Naruto stroked her tummy in small circles and kissed her ear as she brought her arms back down, placing them on top of his. Aiko sighed happily. "I love you, Ota-san." Naruto smiled, shifting her a bit to rest his chin on the top of her head. "I love you too, baby." After another pleasant pause, Aiko pulled herself from her father's embrace and climbed over to the other side of the bathtub, whimpering when his still erect log slipped out from inside her. She turned around to face him before laying down, manipulating her chakra so that she was floating just beneath the water's surface, with only her head and the upper part of her breasts above the water. As an experienced kunoichi, staying in that position using advanced water walking would require next to no effort. It wouldn't be any harder than staying on water while fighting. She slowly curled her legs up to her chest, exposing her special regions to her father's gaze. She had eavesdropped on both her mother and her grandmother when they shared tales of their fun with Naruto, so she had heard on more than one occasion just how much her liked anal sex. She knew it would be painful at first, even with the practice she had had with her fingers. But there was no way she would deny him after making her feel so good. She parted her legs just enough that she could look at him from between them. "Come on, Oto-san. There's still another hole for you to try." Seeing no hesitation in her eyes, Naruto didn't have to ask her if she was sure of herself, and moved up to her on his knees. He smiled when he saw that she was floating at the exact right level for him to enter her. Taking his cock in one hand, he pushed the head against her virgin asshole, causing them both to moan lustfully as it rubbed against the sensitive pink flesh of her tight anus. With a single slow thrust, Naruto drove his length into his daughter's bowels. They both moaned loudly as her slick intestinal walls expanded to accommodate his thick cock. When his pelvis bumped up to her soft butt cheeks, Naruto grinned down at her, drinking in her blissful expression and relieved that she wasn't in too much pain. He bent forwards and pressed a soft kiss to her mouth, nibbling on her lower lip for a moment, before straightening back up. His hands came to rest against her thighs, rubbing them tenderly as he brought her legs up so that her calves were resting on his shoulders, one on either side of his neck. He slowly started rocking his hips back and forth. Aiko moaned as he father's log sawed in and out of her virgin asshole. There was a little pain, which was unpleasant, but it was nothing compared to the delicious fullness of his cock working its way in and out of her rectum. She brought her hands up to her chest and cupped her breasts. She grinned seductively when she saw her father's eyes following her movements, even as he continued to fuck her bum, and got a naughty idea. She pulled her left tit up towards her mouth, tilting her head forwards to close the remaining distance, and closed her lips around her own perky pink nipple. Her boobs were only just big enough to reach, so she had to take care not to loose hold as she rolled and teased the small bud with her tongue, but the result was instant. Her father's cock did the impossible and seemed bulge, becoming even thicker as the sight of his daughter sucking her own breasts sent even more blood into his throbbing dick. Naruto groaned and continued screwing her ass, happy to keep the slow pace she seemed to love but pushing just a little harder on the instroke. "Sweet Kami-sama. You make your two-san so hard, Ai-chan. I'm going to pump your ass till I fill it with my cum." Aiko just moaned happily, switching her mouth to her other breast. After a few more thrusts she came hard, her pussy showering its juices onto Naruto's cock as it continued to plunge in and out of her bum. She moaned in bliss, the vibration tingling down her nipple and through her breast, increasing and prolonging her orgasm even more. Naruto kissed her left leg as he rocked into her clenching ass. Then an idea struck him. He pushed her left thigh back so that her foot was resting on his shoulder, took her ankle in his wrist, and moved her foot in front of his face. He grinned down at her. "Let's see if daddy's little girls is still ticklish, shall we?" He stuck his tongue out and dragged it slowly along the sole of her foot, flicking it between her toes when he reached the top. Aiko squirmed and bit her lip to prevent a loud moan from bursting forth. Naruto smirked and did it again, this time getting a loud moan in response. Her toes flexed, fanning out as jolts of electricity raced down her leg. Still pumping into her ass, Naruto sucked her big toe into his mouth, swirling his tongue around it, making her thrash as she once again exploded into orgasm, showering her hot syrup into the warm water. Naruto moaned and moved onto the second toe as his daughter's anal ring tightened around his cock, stubbornly clinging to it as he pulled out, before greedily swallowing it as he pushed back in. Aiko let her head fall back, teasing her boobs with only her hands as the orgasmic ripples of pleasure cascading through her body made it too hard to keep her head in the slightly awkward position. She stared into her father's eyes as he moved his mouth over to her third toe, the loving thrusts of his massive cock in her dark tunnel creating a wonderful friction that sent waves of heat through her intimate spots, further stoking the fires of her passion. Just as he reached for the fourth toe, it all became too much. The rippling of his daughter's bowels and the tightness of her anal sphincter conspired to forcefully suck the seed from his balls. He erupted deep into her rear passage, spraying her intestines with long ropes of semen that made Aiko let loose a howl of delight. When he had finally emptied his balls into his daughter's now very slimy ass, Naruto gently pulled her up, snuggling her against his chest as they relaxed in the warm water. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Aiko." She wrapped her arms around his back and purred into his chest. "I love you too, Ota-san." 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. The next day a private and secret meeting was held, with only Naruto and the women of the Uzumaki clan attending or knowing of it. When the facts were exposed, Shiro was given a merciful death, never having woken from his unconsciousness. Officially, Naruto killed him when he found him using a seal that faked the effects of an Uzumaki reaction in hopes of getting the clan to join one of the remaining factions of the war. Unofficially, A private ceremony was held and secret documents signed to wed Aiko to Naruto as his second life partner. Natsumi presided over the ceremony to show her blessing of the arrangement. Aiko chose her half-sister, Amaya, as her helper, something the slightly older girl was quite happy with since it allowed her to be with her father, the only other man she had considered as her chosen. Of course, the secret of the affair meant that she didn't tell her husband, using a clone as a decoy. That night and well into the next day, Naruto gave 4 very beautiful women, one his mother, one his sister, and 2 his daughters, the best fuck of their lives. Luckily, they all remembered to use the contraceptive jutsu. Chapter 3. The shinobi world had come to an end. The 4th Great Shinobi War had claimed so many victims that the ninja way of life would never recover. There were a few survivors, but not enough to rebuild even the smallest of villages. Most of them had taken up jobs as hired guards, farmers, and other mundane occupations that would allow them to make a living as they tried to forget what they had lost. The only unscarred remains of the once great shinobi culture was the Uzumaki clan. Naruto sighed sadly as he looked out over the stormy sea, admiring it from his position on the beach. He stood straight and strong, ignoring the biting cold and whipping winds despite his nakedness. The sand was bleach white as it reflected the light of the full moon that was hovering high in the sky, completely visible despite the heavy clouds. It would seem even the midnight weather sympathized with his plight and reflected the inner turmoil of his mind and soul. It had been over a century since Naruto married Aiko, his daughter and second life partner, almost a century and a half since he last saw the walls of Konoha. Many things had happened and, for him, the end of the shinobi era was the lesser of them. Perhaps the saddest was the death of his first daughter, Amaya. He had grown closer to her after she was chosen as helper for his and Aiko's semi-secret union. Amaya may have been deeply in love with her own life partner, but she was also an Uzumaki. Her stamina made it very difficult for her normal husband to satisfy her, and as such, like many Uzumaki women, she was often sexually frustrated. Being chosen as her sister's helper allowed her to be with their father and experience what it felt like to be fucked into unconsciousness. Literally. She would often visit their bed, much like Kushina did. For Naruto, it would become a common thing to fall asleep with 4 naked, sweaty and cum-filled girls cuddling into him. Unfortunately, time is an unforgiving foe. When Amaya's life partner died of old age, she decided to follow him into the afterlife. After tearful goodbyes, and one last session of steamy lovemaking, she blocked off her bloodline, completely cutting off the effects and letting time catch up to her. She died peacefully in her bed with her family of lovers sitting by her side. The Uzumaki had once again become nomadic, in hopes of finding potential life partners for the many single women of the clan. Unfortunately, an Uzumaki woman can only have a reaction to a chakra user, so with the fall of the shinobi era their quest had been crowned with nothing but failure. Naruto was now the only male member of the clan, honorary or not. The other remaining 37 were females, all were immortal, and most were still virgins. Which is what led to Kushina's decision, and his turmoil. As her last act as clan head, Kushina was going to summon the Shinigami. She intended to make a deal with the god of death, offering her life and soul so that the members of her clan may find their life partners despite the changing times. Naruto looked over his shoulder at the single tent, more of a marquee, that had been set up for the night's camp. Having left only a half hour ago, he knew very well what was happening inside. The clan members were offering a mass orgy, showering Kushina with affection to express their gratitude for her sacrifice. Even from his position a good 20 feet away, Naruto could still hear the muffled cries of pleasure drifting through the flap that he had left slightly ajar on his way out. He sighed and looked back out to sea. He wasn't sure what to think about Kushina's decision. He couldn't, and didn't even try, to deny or hide the fact that he had come to care for her. She wasn't one of his life partners, but, with a few notable exceptions, he treated her just as well as he did Natsumi and Aiko. And yet her had never told her that he loved her. Never called her Okasan. It wasn't that he hadn't forgiven her. A century was much too long a time to hold a grudge, especially against a woman that you're screwing on an almost daily basis. He had forgiven her ages ago. He was just being stubborn, his mind refusing to forget what his heart had already left in the past. Now that he was faced with losing her, he was incredibly disappointed in himself. He knew that she still held on to the hope that he would recognize her as his mother, but he had selfishly withheld that from her until her very last moments. He wanted to tell himself that he could make it up to her by giving her a sensational send-off, but he knew that it would be a small reparation. Immortal or not, time lost couldn't be reclaimed. He sighed again and shook his head ruefully. Standing out here coming up with philosophical phrases wouldn't lessen his feeling of guilt. He turned around and headed back to the tent. As soon as he pulled the flap open, he was assaulted by the sight, sound and smell of glistening naked female flesh, writhing tangled limbs, lewd slurping, wet smacking, lustful moaning, and the scent of 37 different bouquets of sweet pussy nectar. His equipment immediately rose to full mast, sticking out proudly in all its 13-inch glory. Naruto wasn't a vain man, but being the center of attention of almost every woman in the room, all of them paragons of feminine beauty, was incredibly flattering. He wouldn't actually touch any of them, since he wasn't even a candidate to them. But he did find a certain pride in knowing that every single one of them had tasted and swallowed his seed during the course of this orgy, sucking and slurping it directly out of Kushina, either from one of the 5 loads he had emptied into her overflowing womb, or one of 18 he had blasted into her slick bowels. He walked directly over to his mother and smiled when he saw his 6-month pregnant daughter giving her a fast-paced finger-fucking. 4 of her slender fingers plunging in and out of the woman's pussy at a speed many jounin wouldn't be able to follow. Naruto smirked. Aiko may not like it rough, but she can certainly give it rough. It was only recently, relatively speaking, that Aiko had finally convinced Naruto to let her bear his child. Her nicely swollen belly was a source of both pleasure and frustration for Naruto. Pleasure because her hormones were of the charts, making her horny almost 24/7. Frustration because front door play was now strictly out of bounds. His cock was simply too big, and the danger of harming the child too great to risk it. Fortunately, this time he had Natsumi and Kushina to catch up the slack, so he wasn't going through pussy withdrawal. He shuddered as he remembered their pregnancies. Not only did he have to put up with the mood swings of 2 hormonal women, but since they were pregnant at the same time, he had had to go without regular sex for almost 9 months. A pair of wet lips on the small of his neck and 2 soft hands wrapping around his waist made his mouth curve into a smile. He turned his head to the side to look at the woman behind him. "Hey Natsumi, how's it going?" His first life partner smiled back and went up on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "It's all going well. We're reaching the end now. All the others have expressed their thanks many times over. It's just us now. Family's final goodbyes and all that." Naruto turned around and stroked her cheek, trying to soothe the sadness she carried in her voice. She gave him a watery smile to show she'd be all right. "Where were you? I saw you were missing for a while." Naruto sighed sadly. "I went out to get some fresh air and to clear my thoughts." Natsumi grinned, her voice filled with fake astonishment. "What? My husband stepped out to clear his mind of all these beautiful naked women? I'm not sure if I should be happy or worried." He grinned back playfully. "Hey, watching all these naked beauties is great, but only being able to play with 3 of them can frustrate even the best of men." She snorted in amusement, having heard a good number of her clan sisters express a similar disappointment about not being able to play with him. Of course, she knew that he didn't really want any of the other women, so it didn't bother her. She looked back up at him, a more serious expression on her face. "What was really bothering you?" Naruto sighed again. "I was just thinking about." His head tilted to the side and she instantly knew what he meant. She smiled sadly at him, patting his cheek. "It'll be all right, Koi. We'll make it through. This is what she wants. It's how she wants to go." Naruto nodded as they turned, a grin gracing both their faces as they watched their daughter make their mother scream in orgasm. "I know. I just wish there was another way. I don't want her to go," he finished in a whisper. Unknown to him, Kushina was still aware enough of her surroundings that her sharp ears had allowed her to hear him. Happy tears trickled from the corners of her eyes. She had long since known that her son had forgiven her, even if he didn't say it. She could honestly say that the time since he had rejoined the family had been the best years of her life. He had treated her so well that she often felt as if she was one of his life partners, and in truth the idea was more than welcome. If it wasn't for the fact that an Uzumaki can only have one life partner, she was sure that she would have had a very strong reaction to him. She had also freely admitted many times over that sex with her husband hadn't ever come close to sex with her son. A fact that, she knew, gave the only true male Uzumaki a perverse satisfaction. Looking back on the last century or so, she was slightly ashamed of the number of times she had told him, quite explicitly and in great detail, just how much better a lover he was than his father. But the enthusiasm he showed in plowing her senseless on those occasions was more than enough to drown any guilt. Her thoughts were wiped away when Aiko suddenly buried her fingers in her pussy, twisted her hand around, and stuffed her thumb up her asshole. Kushina wailed in pleasure as her granddaughter squeezed her inner wall, keeping a firm hold on it as her hand grinded in and out of both of her warm tunnels. Double penetration was something that neither she, Natsumi, or Aiko were very fond of. It wasn't that they didn't like taking their lover in both holes. It was just that he was much too big for them to find much pleasure in getting fucked by two of his monster cocks at the same time. They had done it, of course. All three of them would allow him to indulge from time to time, but it was a rare thing. Taking his dick in one hole and a finger or two in the other, however, was entirely different. She loved it. A hand and thumb wasn't quite as good, but after the hours of orgasm she had been given so far, thanks to her loving clan members and energetic son, it was a close second. She moaned loudly as her granddaughter's hand tore into her pussy and ass, parting her folds with rough thrusts and pulling out with brisk scrapes. She splayed her finger on the outstroke, making her vagina stretch to accommodate them. Syrup spilt freely from her parted folds, splashing down to the already drenched floor. Kushina's eyes fluttered as she rode the never-ending waves of pleasure, a silly grin splitting her face and refusing to leave it. The grin widened when a soft-lipped mouth latched onto her right breast and a silky hand grasped her left. She glanced down and met eyes with Natsumi, who was smirking at her as she nibbled on her stiff nipple. Kushina switched her gaze over to where Naruto was standing a few feet away. He was turned to the side, so he didn't see her watching him, stroking his large rod vigorously as the rest of the Uzumaki women, bar the few unconscious ones, gathered in front of him, hoping to catch some more of his delicious cream. She almost laughed out loud at the ridiculousness of the scene. He saw jacking off as over a dozen of her clan sisters knelt in front of him, bunched up in a tight group and tongues stretched out lewdly in anticipation. Her breath was stolen from her lungs when Natsumi sucked her boob into her mouth and bit down hard enough to leave teeth marks. An obscene moan ripped from Kushina's lips as her daughter licked up the fresh blood with a sly grin on her face before leaning over and repeating the process on the other boob. The shallow wounds healed almost instantly thanks to her bloodline, leaving only an electric tingle that was amplified as Natsumi went back to work on her nipples, nipping and teasing them relentlessly. Natsumi swung her leg over and straddled her mother, rubbing her wet pussy lips into the older woman's toned stomach. She grasped her breasts, each hand fondling one roughly, pinching and pulling the nipples to almost painful lengths. Kushina's moans were swiftly muffled as her mouth was covered in a searing kiss. Tongues clashed and writhed as mother and daughter battled for dominance. Eventually Kushina won, her head rising upwards as her soft tongue invaded her daughter's mouth and explored it eagerly. Aiko pouted as she tried, and failed, to bring her mouth down to her grandmother's lower lips. She stared angrily at her swollen belly before stroking it affectionately. As happy as she was to be pregnant with her father/life partner's child, she was certain that she wouldn't try to convince him into giving her another. 9 months may not be much for her in the greater scheme of things, but she really didn't like the negative effects it was having on her sex life. First, she couldn't take his wonderfully big cock in her pussy, and now she couldn't even bend over properly. Silently promising herself to make him fuck her the moment she had given birth, she set about finding a way to reach Kushina's pussy despite the obstacle that was her pregnant tummy. She smirked. Natsumi frowned when a pair of feet appeared beside her head. She looked over her shoulder to see her daughter pushing Kushina's legs up, forcing her pelvis to rise so that she could bend down to it with her limited reach. She smiled sympathetically at her daughter, knowing firsthand the woes of pregnancy. Doing what she could to help, she wiggled up a little, seized Kushina's ankles and pulled them forwards, tucking them under her armpits and making the woman under her wince at the contortion. She then went back to playing with the woman's tits. Aiko grinned. Her grandmother's pelvic area was finally within reach. Unfortunately, her pussy was now firmly pressed into her mother's back, so she couldn't eat her out the way she had wanted to. That didn't bother her for more than a moment, however, when she saw Kushina's butt cheeks were spread out, clearly framing her puckered hole. She bent down and pressed her tongue to the crinkled pink flesh, running around it teasingly and occasionally flicking over the tightly shut entrance. She tried to push in but found the resistance to be too much. She quickly slipped a hand up and sucked her pointer finger, swirling her tongue around it to coat it in a generous amount of saliva, before pushing it to Kushina's asshole. It resisted for a moment before giving way, sucking up the digit with an ease gained from taking Naruto's cock on a regular basis. Aiko giggled when she heard a soft moan, obviously caused by the penetrating finger, and started sliding it in and out slowly. She bent back down and started licking around her finger as it plunged in and out, making it gradually get messier and messier as her saliva caused Kushina's anus to make lewd slurping sounds. She pulled her finger out and quickly shoved her tongue in before the tight hole could seal shut. She grasped the woman's hips and moaned into her ass as she explored her rectum. The lingering taste of her father's seed made Aiko all the more eager, and she channeled chakra into her tongue, making it lengthen further into Kushina's bowels, cleaning up every last remaining drop of semen she could find. Kushina's breath became labored as she felt the fleshy appendage in her dark tunnel wriggling about, sliding against her intestinal walls searchingly. Combined with her daughter's sensual massaging of her breasts, she could feel her coils rapidly tightening for the Kami only knows how many-titch orgasm. She tilted her head to the side to see how her son was doing, only to find her view slightly obstructed by her own foot, a cocktail of vaginal juices dripping off of it and splashing on the floor. A bit of color rose to her already flushed cheeks at the thought that most of the juices were her own, with only a smaller part having come from her clan sisters. Said sisters were still crowded around Naruto, some of them shamelessly playing with a mouthful of thick white liquid that, instantly telling her that his masturbation had already made him come at least once. As her daughter and granddaughter's ministrations brought her dangerously close to her next release, she tilted her head a little more to get a better view, just in time to see Naruto reach his own. She moaned wantonly as she watched him spray the women with long thick ropes of his heavy cream, splashing it over their faces, in their hair and over their outstretched tongues. She was a faint blue glow at his balls, signaling the active and voluntary use of his bloodline. She smirked at his generosity, knowing that he was forcing himself to produce enough cream to satisfy all of their thirst. The sight and sound of the powerful blasts set her off, and blinding bright lights dashed across her vision as she came hard. Her asshole clenched down on Aiko's tongue, trapping it securely inside her saliva-slicked anal passage. Vaginal juices squirted violently upwards, her position causing them to shoot up Natsume's back, spraying her hair with the sweet and sticky syrup. Naruto groaned and took a step back as he finally let his unnaturally long series of ejaculations come to a finish with one last spurt in one of the younger Uzumaki women's face. He had been so focused on using his bloodline to force his balls into making more cum and aiming at each and every face that he had lost track of time and had no idea how long he had been coming. From the numb sensation in his legs, he had the feeling that it had been a good handful of minutes at the least. He looked down and shivered. From the amount of thick white cream that was plastered all over the girls, his assessment seemed to be quite accurate. It was the first time that he had used his bloodline in that fashion, and he was rather surprised at the results. It gave the phrase cum bath a whole new dimension, one that Natsume and Aiko would be happy to explore, he had no doubt. He stomped his legs a few times to get them back to a non-jelly-like feel, and left the happy girls to play with their prize. Kami-sama, there's something about having over a dozen hot-as-hell women sucking up your cum that's both terribly wrong and yet amazingly satisfying at the same time. He shook his head ruefully. The fact that they're all quite closely blood-related to me only makes it hotter. Kami-sama, I love incest. He chuckled as he watched his mother slowly come down from the pleasure high Natsume and Aiko had given her. He could honestly say that he had no interest in any woman that wasn't family. The last century of his life had given him a definite taste for the forbidden flesh, one that he felt no need to rid himself of. He was already hoping that his and Aiko's daughter would join in when she was old enough. Only time would tell. He knelt down next to Kushina and gently pried his two life partners off of her, readying her for what would probably be their last time together. Kushina looked up at her son with tearful eyes. I heard what you said earlier, Naruto-kun. I want you to know that, even when I'm gone, I'll always love you. A tear rolled down Naruto's cheek. I know. I love you, Oka-san. Tears of happiness flowed from Kushina's eyes. She suddenly lurched up, flinging her arms around his neck and pulling him into a passionate kiss. Naruto's eyes widened in shock, then closed slowly as he kissed her back. He gently crawled on top of her, allowing her legs to wrap around his waist. With his hands occupied supporting them both, he fumbled as he tired to direct his cock to her entrance. Seeing his difficulty, Aiko reverently took hold of her father's meat pole and placed the tip at Kushina's nether lips. She then sat back next to her mother to watch their life partner give his last goodbye. Still fully engaged in the passionate lip lock, Naruto slowly sunk into his mother, gradually parting her tight folds as they strained against his girth. When he bottomed out, he only swayed back up an inch or two before slowly grinding back in. He continued like that, keeping a slow sensual pace with short loving thrusts to express his love for her as much as he could, rather than the usual rough and fast-paced sex they shared. He moved his mouth to the side of her head, nibbling on her earlobe as he kept the slow pace, whispering huskily each time he bottomed out. I love you, Oka-san. I love you. I love you. Kushina felt the fire in her nether regions rise higher and faster than ever before, his sweet mantra fueling it until it burned like a raging furnace. Sweat dripped off of both of them, making their entwined forms glisten erotically in the dim light. She tightened her legs around his back, forcing him to stay close and deep inside her, his strokes even shallower than before. She moaned and mewled into his ear to tell him how wonderful he was making her feel, and was rewarded by him adding a rolling motion to his hips, twisting his slightly curved godly shaft as it throbbed in her life-giving cave. Naruto trailed kiss down her neck, under her jaw and the back up the other side, moving at a snail's pace until he reached the other ear and went back to whispering his words of love. Kushina's walls tightened dangerously and started contracting around his member as a powerful orgasm came down on her. She whimpered softly as his steady grinding kept her going on, continuously prolonging her pleasure as her juices slid down his length. Naruto's whispers turned to grunts of pleasure as his mother's hot wet folds churned around his cock as if with a life of their own. He felt his release approach at a steady rate and was certain that he could just stay there and let her writhing vaginal muscles finish him off. Nonetheless, he labored on, pushing through the pleasure that was assaulting his senses and forcing back his own release to make hers last as long as possible. Kushina's entire body began to shiver, and she was forced to lock her heels to keep her legs securely around his back. Her arms slackened around his neck as her body became numb with pleasure. She felt Naruto's big cock twitch and bulge, and she knew he was at his limit. With a final effort, she squeezed her legs, pulling him all the way in as her constricting tunnel clamped down on him with a vice-like grip. Naruto let out a loud grunt as the seed was sucked out of his balls. His body went rigid, shooting rope after rope into his mother's fleshy pot, painting her womb with his cum as she clung to him desperately, violent spasms shaking her body. When the floodgates finally calmed, he collapsed on top of her utterly spent. With the last of his strength, he flipped them over, so that his mother was resting on top of him, and wrapped his arms around her protectively. 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0 degrees 0. The Uzumaki clan stood assembled on the sandy shore. Across the sea, the sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting its light over the watery surface in an awe-inspiring display that would be carved into their memories for the rest of their lives. Mortal and immortal alike. It was a new dawn. Not just the beginning of a new day, but the beginning of a new life for everyone present. With a sigh, Kushina stepped forwards, bit her thumb, ran through a series of hand seals, and slammed her hand down on the ground. Kuchiyos no Jutsu. There was a large puff of chakra smoke that slowly cleared to reveal the god of death. Of the 38 Uzumaki present, Naruto included, all had been expecting the Shinigami to be either a giant, horned guy with a knife in his mouth, or maybe a tall skeleton with a hooded cloak and an oversized scythe. They all stared in shock at red-haired beauty that stood before them. Her hair was blood red and reached down to her waist in a single, perfect, silky curtain. Her eyes were onyx black and held an ageless wisdom that no human could hope to match. Her perfectly proportioned lips were equally black, but had a glossy sheen to them that made man and woman alike want to lean in to capture them. Her skin was a pale white that contrasted drastically with the other two colors and yet only added to her otherworldly beauty. They all stared at her in shock as they struggled to understand what was going on. After 5 minutes of this, the Shinigami got tired of the pointless staring. "Hi guys." Kushina blinked, then looked at the woman uncertainly. Shinigami? Sama?" She nodded. "Yup." Kushina opened and closed her mouth a few times to find her voice. We weren't expecting." The death god chuckled. "Let me guess. I'm not what you expected." She was answered by 38 simultaneous nods. "That's understandable. After all, this is only the 3rd time I've answered a summons in person." At their questioning looks, she offered an explanation. "There are many ways to summon me. The summoning technique you just used is only one of them, and one of the less powerful ones at that." She shrugged. "Usually when a mortal summons me, I take a quick look at what they want and send an avatar to take care of it. You could compare it to sending a clone rather than going myself. I'm a god after all. I'm hardly going to disrupt my day-to-day affairs just to seal a rowdy bijou or something similarly insignificant." The clan sweat dropped at what was obviously her description of the Kyuubi's attack. Seeing as the rest of her clan seemed a bit overwhelmed, Kushina continued to be spokesperson. "So, this is your true form?" She got an amused nod. "Then, why would you come in person for us?" She grinned happily. "Well, I thought it could be interesting. After all, I'm the one who gave the women of your clan their bloodline. It's only natural that I'd come to help you with your problem." They all took a moment to process the fact that their bloodline came from a goddess. Then Naruto took a tentative step forwards. "Excuse me, Shinigami Mama. If you created the Uzumaki bloodline, do you know how it is that I'm able to use it?" She smiled at him slyly. "Of course I do, Naruto-kun," she said, speaking with a purr that made color rise to his cheeks. Your bloodline activated because you came in contact with my power when your father used it to seal the fox. She paused in thought. You may not know this, but another boy born from an Uzumaki mother activated his bloodline, although nowhere near the level you've attained. His name was Yakushi Kabuto. In his case, he came in contact with my power because he was playing around with the Kuchios, Edo Tensei no Jutsu. The indifference with which she spoke of the technique surprised Naruto. He would have thought that she would be angry that there was a technique that allowed to resurrect the dead, even if it was temporary. Then again, he thought, why would she care about a few souls out of the countless billions that are probably under her authority? Kushina cleared her throat. Anyway, Shinigami-sama, I summoned you because I wish to make a deal. I offer. The goddess cut her off with a wave of her hand. You offer me your soul so that the rest of your clan sisters can find their life partners despite the fall of the chakra era. I know, it's already taken care of. Kushina blinked but didn't get the chance to say anything as Shinigami turned to address the clan as a whole. All of you will have a choice to make. You can choose to keep your bloodline and nothing will change. Or you can choose to abandon your bloodline. You have as long as you wish to make the choice, but once it's made there's no coming back. If you choose to abandon your bloodline, you will no longer have advanced healing, you will no longer be able to stop your aging, you will no longer be able to use your chakra. In essence, you will become a civilian. However, you will be blessed with very good health, and you will still have a sense to help you find your life partner. If you choose to lose your bloodline, any daughters you have will be born without the ability to use it. If you keep your bloodline, any daughters you have will have the choice on whether to keep it or not. Naruto was certain that she sent him a cheeky wink as she said that last part, and it gave him the distinct impression that she knew about his hopes for his and Aiko's daughter. After a last round of tearful goodbyes, and thank yous, both Kushina and Shinigami simply disappeared in a flash of light. Shinigami watched sadly as the clan dispersed, each going their separate ways to put the gift Kushina's sacrifice had given them to good use. She already knew that almost all of them would choose to abandon their bloodline. She turned to the group that held those who wouldn't give up their bloodline, and who she knew would live for many, many years to come. Naruto, Natsumi, and Aiko. She grinned as she thought of the other gift she had given those three, as well as the unborn twin girls in Aiko's womb. Her little present so that they would, one day, be reunited with their mother. A little seed of death that will grow into a great tree of divinity. Chapter 4. Ota-san, Ota-san. The voices were distant, as if muffled. Ota-san. Oof. Naruto woke up with a jolt as two bundles of energy jumped onto the bed, landing heavily on top of him and forcing the air from his lungs. He chuckled as Miki and Kimi prattled on at him, telling him to hurry up and get ready for school. Uzumaki Miki and Uzumaki Kimi were the twin daughters of Naruto and Aiko. Chin-length red hair, cute pink lips, they were perfectly identical except for their heterochromatic eyes. Miki's left eye was amethyst while her right was blue, whereas Kimi's left was blue while her right was amethyst. Having learnt from their mother's mistake, they had told their father the instant they had a reaction to him, and had wasted no time in telling him that they wanted to be his third-and-a-half life partner. They couldn't decide on who would be third and who would be fourth, so they split halfway. By that time Naruto had long since discarded any sort of social taboo, as far as his life partners were concerned, so he had claimed them the very same day. Even though the Uzumaki clan had officially disbanded, they had decided to stick by the clan traditions for the union. Natsumi, as the eldest Uzumaki woman, had presided over the marriage ceremony, bringing the number of Naruto's life partners to 4. It was also then that they decided to call themselves eternal life partners, the reason of which were fairly obvious. The two girls had been 14 at the time, which had made sex with Naruto's large meat very interesting. So interesting in fact that they had both decided to stop their aging and keep their pubescent bodies forever. With the high level of hormones that was constantly coursing through their bloodstream, Naruto's two youngest were the very definition of nymphomaniacs. They had developed an array of techniques that more than compensated for their diminutive size, as well as made sex more fun. Naruto and his 4 eternal life partners had lost count of exactly how long they had lived. If they had to give a quick estimate, they would say that it had been roughly 40,000 years, give or take a few millennia. The world had changed more than they could have imagined. Chakra was now considered a myth, even though everyone still had it at civilian levels, and was only spoken of in various superstitions. The elemental nations were long since forgotten, the land having completely rearranged itself into 5 new continents. Buildings taller than those in Amigakure were now a common sight. Great machines could now fly high in the sky or navigate deep in the ocean. Science had truly taken over. They had, of course, kept up to date on all the latest advancements, easily mastering every branch of knowledge with the use of shadow clones. They had invested in many companies under many different aliases, using reinforced clones under an advanced henge to make the cover identity even more realistic. They always got a laugh out of the dirty business tactics some of the companies used to outdo their competition, unknowing of the fact that they were actually owned by the same 5 people. The Uzumaki family now lived in a huge estate in the English countryside. They had combined their talents in fuinjutsu and jinjutsu to shield it from any and all types of scrutiny, even satellite surveillance. As such, they had been able to keep the same location for the last few centuries. Naruto chuckled as he watched his 2 girls race back out of the room, the miniskirts of their school uniforms bouncing up and flashing him with their white panties with each step they took. He clambered out of bed, pulled some baggy pants onto his naked frame, and made his way downstairs for breakfast. To occupy themselves during their eternal lives, the 5 Uzumaki had taken the habit of trying out different careers, making good use of the advanced henge and jinjutsu to insert themselves wherever they wanted. Sometimes they would replace an existing person, other times they would create a new identity altogether. However, whereas Naruto, Natsumi, and Aiko kept an open mind and tried a bit of everything, Miki and Kimi had developed a fondness for the infamous high school years. They had tried different things, but for some reason they just loved high school. They were now on what was probably their 50th school. All 3 of the older members of the family had tried it out, just to see what the big deal was, but they hadn't found the experience particularly grasping. Nonetheless, Naruto wasn't going to complain. The flat-soled shoes, the mid-thigh height socks, the mini-skirts, the tight shirts, the smart ties, and the small jackets. Those uniforms really turned him on. Naruto stepped into the kitchen and smiled lovingly at the 4 beautiful females. "Hello, loves," he said in fluent English. 4 beautiful faces turned and smiled back at him, each with their own greeting. Natsumi was sitting at the table, a pencil in the corner of her mouth and a notepad next to her plate as she jotted down ideas for the sequel to her bestseller novel. "Good morning, darling." Aiko was in front of the stove with her hair in a bun and wearing an apron as she prepared breakfast. "Hello, honey." Miki and Kimi were chatting happily about the day to come. "Hi, Daddy." He made a slow circuit around the room, taking time to greet each one of them with a deep kiss, before sitting down in his chair at the head of the table. Natsumi smirked at him, tucking the pencil behind her ear. "So, are you ready for Bring You Parent Day?" The twins immediately perked up. "Of course he's ready. Aren't you, Daddy? Oh, it's going to be so much fun. There'll be stands, and activities, and plays, and a special lunch, and—" The adults rolled their eyes at their antics. They often wondered how the girls could be so childlike despite their real age. They did have a more mature side, but it rarely came out. The Uzumaki family had lived through many, many wars. So there were times when the 2 seemingly cute and defenseless little girls had shown that they could be just as ruthless killers as the others. Nonetheless, in everyday life, they were just 2 very bubbly 14-year-olds. Because of that, the family dynamic had Naruto as the father, Natsumi and Aiko as his wives, and finally Miki and Kimi as the children who, since they had equal hand in raising them, considered both women to be their mothers. Of course, when it came to sex, they were all equal players. Aiko turned from the stove and put a perfectly prepared full English breakfast on their plates. Naruto gave her a small peck on the lips as she sat down before addressing his hyperactive daughters. "All right, girls, calm down. Eat up and we'll get going." They immediately tucked into their breakfast, devouring it with the gusto that only young people can manage. He turned to Aiko. "What are you doing today?" Aiko took a sip of her coffee. "I might replace one of my clones at the hospital. There's an interesting surgery that I wouldn't mind taking care of, but I think I'll stay here with Natsumi-chan. I think she could do with some inspiration for her book." Naruto felt something brush past his knee and, judging by their expressions, got the distinct impression that his first 2 life partners were playing footsie under the table. He smirked. His wives were almost as fond of each other as they were of him. It was a common occurrence for him to walk in on them cuddling and kissing or even eating each other out. It never failed to turn him on. There were even nights when they would stay together in one of the spare rooms rather than join him and the twins in the main bedroom. He didn't mind. In fact, he was happy that they shared such a deep connection. And the twins certainly weren't complaining, since it meant that, on those nights, he could spend twice as much time playing with them. He let them have their fun and began on his own meal. He had the feeling that he would need all his energy for the day to come. 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0. Naruto walked out the front door and grinned at his daughters as they made exaggerated gestures of waiting for him, huffing and puffing and tapping their feet. "All right, are you girls ready?" "Of course we're ready, Daddy. We've been waiting for ages." He smirked playfully. "Are you sure? We can always stay home if you'd." He didn't get a chance to finish before they each grabbed a hand and all three disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto stumbled slightly, the result of flashing halfway around the world from England to Japan, but easily caught himself as they reappeared in a small alleyway. He looked at the wall and smirked when his sharp eyes picked out the flying thunder god seal painted there for all to see. After all, it wasn't as if anyone was going to recognize it. He placed an arm on each girl's waist and headed down the road, beginning the 2-block walk to the school his daughters were currently attending. He seamlessly slipped into Japanese so as not to attract too much attention from the locals. "So what are you girls going to do when you graduate from Kishu High? Stay at home with your old man for a few years? Try something new? Or hit another high school?" They both looked up at him with identical pouts at his teasing voice. Mickey gave him a small glare. "Don't be mean, Oto-san." Kimi grinned. "Then again, if you're feeling a bit lonely." Mickey caught on and continued. "We can always stay at home for a few years. 2. Keep you company. Oh. 2. San. Naruto felt a shiver run up his spine as his loins stirred at their seductive teasing. He almost burst out laughing when he saw an old lady staring at them, scandalized at the sultry tone his daughters had used, and looking as if she was about to have a heart attack. He discreetly squeezed their bums as they reached the school gates. "That sounds like a great idea. You both know how much I love it when you keep me company." A silly grin stretched across the 14-year-olds' faces. The trio casually made their way across the schoolyard and into the girls' classroom. Naruto easily ignored the stolen glances and stifled giggles he attracted from schoolgirls, female teachers, and married mothers alike. His physical condition hadn't withered in the slightest since the shinobi days, and even then he had been one of the most desirable men for females from everywhere but Konoha. So it wasn't a surprise when, dressed in a form-fitting and well-tailored suit, he became the center of all female attention. The twins were used to the attention their father got when he came out of the house, so it didn't bother them that so many women were drooling over their eternal life partner. In fact, since they knew that he wouldn't have the slightest bit of interest in any of them, they found the open looks of lust to be rather amusing. Of course, they themselves were drawing a good number of lustful looks from the males in the area. They both glowed with pride, knowing that for all the other men's desires, their father was the only one who would ever be allowed to claim their bodies. If they added up all their high school years, they had probably rejected over 100 boys who sought to date them, if not 200. Naruto snatched a program from a girl who was giving them out, thanking her with a charming smile that reduced her into a blushing mess. Naruto chuckled and read the program. Day 1, morning. Class presentation, location. Class. Parents are invited to their child's homeroom where the class will give a presentation on their school field trip. Field trip. That was the trip to Osaka, wasn't it? Day 1, lunch. Class preparation, location. Class. The meal will be a collection of regional specialties from the area the class visited. Day 1, afternoon. School play, location. Assembly hall. Each class will perform a short play in front of the whole school. Day 2, all day, school fair, location, yard. Each class will have at least one stand that can be visited throughout the day. Well, that sounds like fun. Mickey glared up at him, obviously not finding his response to be enthusiastic enough. Of course it'll be fun, Oto-san. Osaka was great. Kimi continued chirpily. We got to eat the special crab. That's one of the things we'll be having for lunch. Naruto looked at them with a deadpan expression. Girls, we've eaten Osaka crab dozens of times. He clamped his mouth shut when they both glared at him. I'm sure it'll be lovely. They arrived at room 4B, the twins' homeroom class. Tables had been arranged so that people could sit 4 to a table, with 2 on each side. Naruto let the girls lead him to the back of the room and they all sat down. Mickey sitting next to her father and Kimi sitting opposite him. There was a bustle as other children came in with their parents. Sometimes just their mother or father, but mostly with both. After a short introduction by the homeroom teacher, the presentation started, with the students going up in front of the class in pairs. Mickey smirked at her sister and initiated their plan to make things more fun. They both knew that their father was expecting it, since they had done something of the sort at every school event at every school they had attended, but that wouldn't make it any less enjoyable. Slipping her hand under the table, she activated a small seal that they had prepared. It was a simple and rather weak masking genjutsu seal that probably wouldn't fool a mid-genin. But it was more than enough in a room full of civilians that didn't even know what genjutsu was. It would hide anything that literally happened under the table, and only under the table, from view. She then slipped her hand over her father's thigh and, avoiding any sudden movements that would attract attention, she fished his soft but fat dick out of his pants. She channeled chakra to her nose and breathed in deeply, letting out a small happy sigh when she picked up the slightly musky scent of his cock meat. She turned her head and gave a slight nod to her sister. Seeing the nod, Kimmy carefully kept the grin off her face as she toed off her right shoe. She then, just as carefully, pulled off her right sock, letting the long piece of cotton clothing fall to the floor with a soft patter. With everything ready, and making sure not to let her upper body language change, she slowly brought her leg up. Naruto shot a grin at his daughter and went back to pretending to listen to the presentation. History was a source of amusement for him since, in often cases, either he or his clones had actually witnessed the events or heard first-hand accounts of them. What would people think if they knew that the first man on the moon was actually a clone hidden by a camouflage genjutsu? Mickey wrapped her small hand around as much of her father's big cock as she could and started tugging it to hardness. Having stopped their aging at 14 barely years old, she and her sister were only a little over 5 foot tall. So they were completely dwarfed by their father's 6 foot inches, a fact that secretly pleased both girls greatly. When she felt his bulging erection reach its full glory, she sent another small nod to her sister and slipped her hand further into his pants. With the second nod, Kimmy moved her foot from where it was hovering under the table and moved it forwards. With a dull sound of flesh on flesh that only the 3 Uzumaki heard, the soft sole of her small foot pressed against the underbelly of his cock. Naruto shivered at the feel of his daughter's warm foot on his cock. That was something he hadn't expected. He bit back a pleasured groan as Kimmy started to move her foot up and down his length. The fact that his hot rod was the longer of the two, and by a fair margin, only made the experience more erotic. It only got better as Mickey's hand slipped into his pants and boxers to cup his balls. Her slender fingers curled as they massaged his sack. Kimmy lifted her foot to the top of his shaft. She tried to catch it between her bog toe and the one next to it, failing spectacularly because of his thickness but still causing her father a pleasurable sensation from the soft pinching. Naruto groaned as the double assault continued, his cock twitching and his balls tightening. He quickly covered it up with a small coughing fit. Seeing that it had attracted the attention of quite a few people, Mickey looked up at her father with wide innocent eyes, all the while giving his balls a good squeeze and rubbing a fingertip up and down his prostate. "Are you feeling okay, Ota-san?" Kimmy grinned as her sister's cute act made most of the males in the room sport small nosebleeds. Much to her approval, her father's blood went in an entirely different direction, making his already throbbing meat log pulse and twitch under her foot. She pressed harder and pick up her pace. Naruto let his coughing fit end and shook his head at his daughter's innocent question, speaking in a slight rasp to cover the pleasure in his voice. "I'm fine, Mickey-chan. A bit of a sore throat is all." He grinned down at her, leaning over and placing a small kiss on her forehead, making her blush despite the tameness of the gesture compared to what her hand was currently doing. Coming to her twin's rescue, Kimmy copied her innocent doe-eyed expression, then brought her left pointer finger up to her pouting lips in a naive but incredibly suggestive thinking pose. "Mao, Ota-san, maybe I can get you some of your favorite juices later on, any?" She finished by inserting her finger into her mouth slightly and giving his crotch an extra strong rub with her foot. Even though they didn't catch the innuendo, half the males, and some of the females, in the room seemed to go faint from blood loss as their noses dribbled the vital fluid all over their tables. Naruto held back his gulp, forcing out a fatherly smile as he felt his nutsack start to churn. "Thank you, Kimmy-chan. That'll be lovely. But let's wait for the presentation to finish first." He let out a small sigh of relief as the attention went back to the 2 students at the front. The rubbing and fondling of his balls, combined with the skillful foot job, was bringing him to his limit. His cock started to twitch sporadically and he knew he was close. Feeling her father's cock start to twitch under her ministrations, Kimmy did one last upwards rub and stopped her foot. She curled her toes over his bulbous cock head, wriggling them a little to stimulate the sensitive glands. She recoiled slightly when her father's face slipped into the stony mask that she had only rarely seen, but a moment later she giggled into her hand when she understood that he was using it to hide his pleasure rather than because he was angry. She was proven right when the next twitch of his cock was accompanied by a hard spurt of cum that tangled in her toes, creating a messy slop. She kept her foot in place, teasing with her wriggling toes as they were blasted by rope after rope of her father's warm, sticky spunk. It was only thanks to his years of experience that Naruto maintained his composure as Mickey kept fondling his balls, stroking the area beneath them in sync with the throbbing, coaxing more cum along his squirting canal. It splashed against Kimmy's toes, oozing back down his length between her foot and his shaft. The teacher's voice suddenly broke into their fun. The next presentation will be given by Uzumaki Kimmy and Uzumaki Mickey. Caught in mid-orgasm, it took all of Naruto's concentration to return his facial expression to a normal one. He didn't want to creep people out by giving them a shinobi veteran's glare, and he certainly didn't want the questions that would be asked if he showed his pleasure face. Because of that, he missed the slight spikes of chakra from his daughters. He was thankful for the clattering of chairs as the twins got up, covering the sound of his last two cum spurts impacting against the bottom surface of the table. He sagged in his chair slightly and frowned when he saw that Kimmy had both her socks and shoes on both feet. How? She might be able to move fast enough that these civilians can't see, but she shouldn't be able to escape my... His answer came in the form of a tongue, two tongues, that started licking his cum-coated member from under the table. When their names were called out, Mickey and Kimmy silently cursed. Despite knowing their father's stamina, they had thought that they could finish before they were called. In a shared flash of inspiration, they each created a clone under the table, Kimmy making sure that it was fully clothed, and performed a quick kawarimi with them. As the two clones were heading up front to give a presentation on a historically important Okinawa cave, the originals were crouched under the table, watching as their father's hard cock splattered the bottom surface with the last two blasts of his seed. Without even looking at each other, they crawled forwards and, in perfect coordination, drug their tongues from base to tip, nice and slowly. They carefully cleaned up the fresh cum that decorated his hard-on, sharing the treat between them and letting their tongues tangle together as they did so. The rather large deposit that clung to the sole of Kimmy's foot provided her with a pleasant warmth, as well as a feeling of naughtiness, so it remained untouched, leaving a few small, white and sticky partial footprints on the parquet floor. By the time the twins had cleaned up all the cream from their father's rod, their clones had finished giving their presentation and had returned to their chairs. They sat primly, leaving everyone but Naruto with the impression that the two girls were watching the next presentation, done by two of their classmates with polite interest. Naruto bit down on his tongues as the real twins took the next step. One of them elongated her tongue, wrapped it 3 times around his girth, and proceeded to slither the slick, spongy appendage up and down the bottom half of his shaft. The other used her chakra to loosen her jaw, opening it wide enough to take his large cockhead into her mouth, clamping her soft young lips just behind the ridge of the blood-engorged glands. Her cheeks curved in as she sucked hard. Without lessening the suction, she darted the tip of her tongue into his piss slit, and then swiftly down the dip on the underside of his cockhead. She repeated the action, progressively getting faster as she flicked and teased the sensitive flesh. Just when Naruto felt his second release draw near, the twins proved how well they could read him and pulled back, stopping the approaching orgasm in the bud. Mickey's tongue retracted, reassuming its normal length and returning to her mouth. Kimmy let his twitching dickhead plop out and snapped her jaw shut, leaving only an elastic trail of saliva connecting it to her parted lips. He groaned almost inaudibly as he felt the tension in his loins decrease at a rapid pace and, for once, cursed his high stamina and ability to recover so fast. Mickey and Kimmy grinned at each other when their kunoichi ears heard their father's frustrated groan. By their estimate, the presentations would last another hour and a half, and they intended to use that time to torture him to the very limits of frustration, hopefully pushing him into a sexual frenzy. They each pushed a knee, widening the space between his legs so that they could sit more comfortably, and leaned towards each other from opposite sides of his cock. They both elongated their tongue to roughly 3 times its usual length and engaged each other in a sensual, saliva-dribbling French kiss, with Daddy's throbbing member right in the middle. Naruto couldn't restrain the low grunt that rumbled from his throat at the incredible sensation. Picturing what was happening under the table only made it worse. His analytical mind made it very easy for him to imagine every detail of the epic battle of tongues to which his cock was both the stage and the prize. When their father was once aging nearing his limit, the twins pulled back for breath, letting their tongues trail across Naruto's drool-coated cock. They smirked when a shiver of pleasure made his legs tremble. In another display of uncanny teamwork, they both shuffled a little closer to the other. Miki brought her hands up to her sister's neck and gently undid her tie. She folded it up neatly and placed it to one side, before bringing her hands back up and delicately undoing the buttons of her sister's shirt one at a time. She stopped when she got down to the waistline, unable to undo the last two buttons since they were tucked into Kimmy's miniskirt. She slipped her hands inside her sister's shirt, holding the sides of her narrow waist lovingly, then slid them up, parting the shirt to reveal two perfect firm round breasts. Despite stopping their growth at the age of 14, the twins had manipulated their bloodline limit to not stop the growth of their breast. As such, they had the same upper C cups as their mothers, but since the fleshy globes were attached to much smaller bodies, they gave the visual illusion of being larger than they actually were. She skillfully unclasped her sister's bra, placing it next to her tie, and leaving the now unrestrained titties to jiggle enticingly. With her breasts exposed, Kimmy lovingly emulated her twins' actions, unfastening her tie and folding it up, unbuttoning her shirt and parting it, unclasping her bra and freeing her identical breasts. She smirked and gave her sister's left nipple a small pinch and twist. They stared into each other's eyes, their oppositely mismatched colors making it as if they were looking into a mirror, and leaned into a soft mouth-to-mouth kiss. They pulled back with slightly glazed expressions and grinned at each other. A soft growl left Naruto's throat when the girls once again stopped before he could find release. The constant teasing was really whittling down his restraint, frustration and desire clouding his mind. After a few moments, more than long enough for him to fully recover his endurance, he frowned that they didn't return to their work. He fed a little chakra to his ears. His eyes widened when he heard the soft rustling of clothes. The two clones sent him a sly smile, having also heard the sound of their creators undressing. The twins moved back between their father's legs, positioned on either side of his nice cock. They squeezed their respective assets together before leaning into him, trapping the thick love tool between two identical pairs of breasts. Naruto's breath hitched as his daughters guided their hot buns up and down his pole. His balls started to ache, ready to burst from all the simulation he was getting. Under the table, the siblings lip-locked, their long tongues tying and tangling in knots as they plundered each other's mouths and throats. They squirmed as their nipples rubbed together, causing them to stiffen, increasing the sensation even more. They broke apart, their tongues returning to normal, and started placing small kisses and licks all over the tip of their father's cock. When the presentations finally came to an end, Naruto's fists were clasped tight, his fingernails digging into his palms as he exerted every effort to not tip the table over and fuck his little girls senseless. There was a bustle as the students moved around, getting the pre-prepared food for the meal ready, and parents talked between each other. "Hello." Naruto held back a wince as he turned to the voice, revealing an average-height, dark-haired woman standing next to him. He silently berated himself for letting his control slip so far that he didn't notice a civilian walking up to him while simultaneously thanking the genjutsu that hid his exposed cock and his daughters smothering it with their breasts. He smiled at the admittedly fairly attractive woman. "Hello." She blushed a little and apparently took that as her cue to sit down in the now vacant chair next to him. She extended her hand and smiled back. "Nice to meet you. My name is Kawada Hitomi." He took her hand and shook it warmly. "Uzumaki Naruto." He gave himself a mental pat on the back for not allowing his voice to betray the pleasure he was feeling. He was forced to use every bit of willpower he had to keep up his facade as his daughters started nibbling at his cock head, their perfect teeth grating delicately over the erogenous surface. Her eyes lit up in recognition. "Ah, I take it you're the father of Uzumaki Miki and Kimmy?" He answered her with a nod. "My daughter Arisa speaks of them quite often. From what I understand, they are the most popular students in the whole school." She looked appraisingly, color raising to her cheeks as she took in his muscular frame and handsome features. "A thuff. I must say I'm shocked that their father is so young." Naruto let out a genuine laugh at her statement. Physically, he still looked 24 years old, so he understood her shock. But that didn't stop him from being amused that someone was calling him young. He looked at her kindly. "I get that a lot, but I assure you that I am quite a bit older than I look, Kawada-san." He winced when one of his daughters bit down harder than before, obviously not pleased that he was being distracted from her ministrations. Hitomi noticed the wince and looked at him questioningly. "Are you all right, Uzumaki-san?" Naruto waved a hand reassuringly, struggling not to moan out loud as the twins took a new approach, using a small controlled wind blade to cut his trousers at the seam before each sucking one of his bulging testes into her mouth. "I'm fine. A bit of a cramp in my leg is all." Naruto's heart almost stopped when his words prompted her to bend down and peer under the table. Mickey and Kimmy stared at her owlishly, still sucking on Naruto's balls with his erect cock standing upright as a divider between their two faces. They breathed out in relief when the woman's eyes glossed over them, obviously fooled by the jinjutsu. With a vicious grin they went back to work, their panties becoming damp at the naughty situation as they were now performing with an audience, even if she wasn't aware of it. Hitomi looked back up at the sound of plates being put on the table. The clones were back with lunch, arranging the dishes before sitting down. Clone Mickey looked at the woman as she began serving up for her sister and father. "Would you like to eat with us?" After looking off to the other side of the room, she nodded. "Yes, that would be nice. My daughter seems to have joined some of her friends." She turned back to Naruto. "Is their mother?" Under the table, the twins were mentally applauding their clone's genius. Not only were they making it even harder for their father by inviting the woman to eat right next to him, they had also discreetly passed 2 plates of food under when nobody was looking. Kimmy smirked and scooped up some of the crab-flavored curry sauce, blowing on it to cool it down a bit. Naruto's eyes bugged out when he felt a large dollop of the same food he was eating land on his cock. His member twitched violently, flicking droplets all over the place and causing the twins to giggle madly. Hitomi blinked. "Did you hear something?" Naruto shook his head and fished around for something to distract her. "Nope. What do you think about the curry? Not bad, huh?" As the two struck up a discussion, Naruto was subjected to his daughter's repeatedly liking of the curry sauce and spooning more on. When they finished the curry, Mickey looked down at her plate of deep-fried crab dumplings. She leaned close to her sister's ear. "You know what would make these taste really good?" Kimmy nodded solemnly. "Ooh-ha, looks like a change of plans is in order." They both grabbed his cock and started a fast-paced hand job, tugging and twisting the pulsing rod. They were soon rewarded as thick blasts shot out from the tip. They aimed at their plates and grinned as their dumplings were coated in a generous layer of thick hot white cream. Keeping their hands working on his meat pole, albeit at a more sedate pace, the two girls tucked into their yummy treat. Naruto grunted in pleasure as the pent-up load shot from his ballsack and out his tube, playing it off as approval of the food when the woman next to him looked at him questioningly. It felt so good to finally get some release that he almost lost his composure. His relief was short-lived when the hands grasping his cock returned to work, moving at a slow but steady rhythm that was steadily bringing his frustration back to bear. When the meal was finished and people started trickling out of the room, Naruto acted fast. He covered himself with a cloaking genjutsu and created a clone that joined the crowd, giving the impression that all 3 Uzumaki had left the room. As soon as the door slammed shut behind the last person, he let his desire take over and flipped the table over, sending it careening into the opposite wall on the other side of the class. Without paying attention to which one, he grabbed one of his daughters, pulled her up, spun her around, and bent her over the next table. He flipped her miniskirt up, revealing her white panties, the wet spot at her crotch only serving to increase his drive. Her roughly yanked the undergarment down to mid-thigh, grasped his pulsing rod in one hand, presented it to her wet entrance, and thrust in one hard sway of his hips. Kimmy grinned as her sister howled in pleasure at the brutal penetration. Likely she had had enough time to activate the second seal that they had prepared. This one situated on the wall in the corner. It was a powerful privacy seal, the type that was used in Kage offices, and would easily block anyone from knowing what was going on inside. She shivered in anticipation as her father pounded into Mickey's small wet pussy with long, hard and fast thrusts of his monster cock. She slipped a hand under her skirt and started playing with herself. Mickey grunted and gripped the edges of the table so hard that it cracked and splintered. Her eyes were clasped shut in rapture as her father's thick log parted her folds, rocking the table each time he slammed into her. Of the sex-oriented jutsu that she and her sister had created, the most useful was a passive one, but was also vital to them if they wanted to actually have sex. Because of their tiny frames, it was physically impossible for them to take their father's 13-inch pole, so they had created a jutsu that, thanks to the Uzumaki bloodline limit, allowed them to stretch certain parts of their bodies beyond what is humanly possible. Similar to the way her tongue could elongate, her mouth, pussy, and asshole would stretch to accommodate him while maintaining enough resistance to stay pleasurably tight. Naruto growled in pleasure as his painfully hard dick was enveloped in the tight warmth of his daughter's folds. He held her by the hips to prevent her from escaping his rapid-fire penetrations, relishing her breathless grunts as he dominated her diminutive form. He scrunched his eyes closed when the fast pace sent her vaginal muscles into contractions, adding even more pleasure to each stroke. He funneled chakra to his muscles and used the boost to pick up the pace to an even higher one as his coils wound tight, and he felt his impending release ready to spring free. With a last plunge, he buried himself in her sheath and moaned loudly as he emptied his load inside her. The thick jets of cum quickly filled her to the brim, and he pulled out, letting the last spurts land on her back, splattering up her uniform jacket. Without a backwards glance, he turned to his other daughter, his still hard cock a clear indicator of his intentions. Grinning widely, she pounced on him, wrapping her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck. Without really thinking about it, she switched back to English. "Are you ready to fuck your Kimmy, daddy? Are you ready to make her feel so good and full and hot with your big fat cock?" Naruto grinned right back and grinded his crotch into hers, his mind much less clouded but still full of need. "Are you ready, Kimmy-chan?" She gasped and nodded wordlessly, pressing her head against his chest as his fingers pushed her panties to one side, allowing the tip of his member to brush against her nether lips. She braced herself for the intrusion, letting out a drawn-out moan as he pulled her down, impaling her on his length. He lifted her back up, drawing out all but a few inches before pushing her back down and starting over. After a while, Kimmy joined in, using her deceptively strong limbs to bounce up and down energetically, breathing heavily as her father's meat split her in half. She trailed her soft pink lips, swollen in excitement, up to his jawline. "Harder, daddy. Fuck your Kimmy harder, daddy." Naruto shuffled over to the previous table, stopping right next to where Mickey was still bent over, her ass jutting out and her messed-up snatch dripping white from the massive load he deposited inside her. He unhooked Kimmy's arms from around his neck and, never stopping his strong thrusts, pushed her back to rest on the table. Kimmy wailed as the change in angle made his cock stretch her in new and wonderful ways.